Chapter 777. If Luo Fan wanted to understand the drawbacks, he would need to capture some of the creatures in this world and study them for a while. He would even need to do some experiments before he could truly understand what the drawbacks were. Words first appeared. However, there was not much meaning to this. Luo Fan did not plan on doing this. As they spoke, the path of light brought the three of them through the clouds that seemed to be hundreds of thousands of kilometers thick. They arrived at the top of this space-time. This was also the true cave of the beak coffin. Above them, there were countless branches and leaves that covered the sky and covered the earth, completely covering the space above. Each leaf was like a medium-sized island, and each branch was like a huge mountain range. Countless branches and leaves covered the 816th bird's nest, but it gave off an indescribable sense of oppression. It was enough to make any living creature that came to this place feel insignificant. Although the branches and leaves covered the sky, it was not dark above the clouds. It was not very bright, but it was not much different from daytime in the outside world. Although the branches and leaves were huge and densely packed, it was precisely because of their size that the tiny gaps between the leaves and the branches appeared extremely large. These gaps were enough for light to enter, enough to illuminate the space above the clouds. As for where the light was coming from, Bai Yuan did not even need to think to know. It was definitely the boundless light coming from the eternal forest sun. Although this space-time was extremely mysterious and contained indescribable profundities, the structure of the space-time was not too mysterious. It was just the appearance of the tree and the pond around it that could be seen from the outside world, magnified countless times. In this kind of situation, just from the appearance of the tree, one could guess what was above the tree. The cave of the beak coffin was not somewhere else, but rather at the intersection of the 3,816th nest in the middle of the tree. This was where the trunks separated, and it happened to be where the largest gap was, as well as the place with the most light in the entire tree. The cave was very strange, as it was made of countless precious and indescribable materials. There was a mysterious aura emanating from it, as if it was communicating with some mysterious and unfathomable existence. Faintly, there were countless rules and laws constantly entering and exhaling from it. It was as if the abode was breathing in the rules and laws. It was a profound place. It was so mysterious that it could not be described with words. However, other than these mysteries, what made Luo Fan not know whether to laugh or cry was the shape of the cave. The cave was in the shape of a giant bird's nest. It wasn't like a bird's nest that was constructed by a building. Instead, it was a real bird's nest, one that was completely made of branches. It was a giant bird's nest made of leaves and straw. Although the bird's nest was dozens of kilometers wide, it was still a bird's nest. Fellow Taoist really has a fantastic idea. Looking at the bird's nest, Luo Fan didn't know what to say for a while and could only say so. When the beak coffin heard Luo Fan's words, how could it not know that Luo Fan felt that the bird's nest structure was a little strange? It blushed slightly and said, "I have a strange habit. If I don't make it like this, I'll feel uncomfortable living here. Please excuse me, fellow Taoist." Since it had already said that, how could Luo Fan say anything else? He could only say a few words about how everyone had their own hobbies. It was nothing, and there was no need to be ashamed. The path of light came from the bird's nest-like cave. The few of them did not need to move. As they spoke, they were brought to the top of the bird's nest by the path of light. When they arrived above the bird's nest, the path of light shook slightly and disappeared. It was as if it had never appeared in the first place. The bird's nest looked speechless from the outside, but it was not simple at all on the inside. In fact, it was a world of difference from the outside. Although it was the structure of a bird's nest. On the ground above the bird's nest, every branch, every leaf, every strand of hair, and every speck of soil were connected to each other in an incredibly complicated and mysterious way. They influenced each other, combining into an incredibly complicated and harmonious whole that could not be separated at all. Even the tiniest unit in this whole thing was emitting a faint light. This light was extremely mysterious. Although it was illusory, it looked like it had substance. It was condensing in the air according to some complicated pattern. Finally, the light emitted by all the small units condensed into a pavilion in the middle of the bird's nest. There were a few of these pavilions. Although they were formed from light, they were not illusory at all. They seemed to be engraved in the void, as if they had existed since the beginning of time, and would continue to be engraved in this place forever. Seeing this pavilion, Luo Fan inwardly sighed in admiration. He also felt quite relieved. Fortunately, this was a pavilion, and not a small bird's nest. It seemed that the beak coffin's eccentricities were not to the point where he could not bear it. Although he had such thoughts in his heart, his expression naturally wouldn't change too much. This cave abode is the hub of the entire space-time. Every detail in this cave abode corresponds to a certain aspect of the outside world. Thus, in this cave abode, one can completely grasp the entire space-time without even stepping out, the beak coffin explained. It really is a good ability. This way, we can save a lot of effort, and we can also gain a deeper understanding of space-time. It really is a good method, Luo Fan said with a smile. That's right. The beak coffin was indescribably delighted. As they spoke, they had already arrived in front of the several pavilions in the middle of the night. The pavilions were neither too big nor too small. They would not be too empty, but they would not be too crowded either. The pavilions were divided into several rooms. Some were for cultivation, some were for living, and some were for refining pills. Between the pavilions, there were several living beings who had barely stepped into the first stage of the celestial realm, and they were busy. These living beings had the aura of the living beings outside. Clearly, these living beings had grown up in this space-time. They were the living beings created by the beak coffin. Looking at these creatures, Luo Fan couldn't help but gasp in admiration. If a living being could reach the immortal realm, it meant that the living being was qualified to live in nature. It also meant that the existence that created the living being had matured in the Tao of creation. Greetings, God Lord. Those immortal realm life forms saw the beak coffin return. All of them knelt down to welcome him. Judging from their expressions and actions, as well as their thoughts, it was clear that they were completely devoted to the coffin, without the slightest reluctance. There was not the slightest bit of falseness. It was as if he was willing to give up his own life for it. Get up. I have guests who have arrived. You all can leave, said the beaked coffin indifferently. There was no majesty in his words, and the aura on his body was still restrained. However, there was a sense of superiority, as if he was in control of everything. The living beings did not have any objections to these words. They responded respectfully and carefully retreated. Although they have reached the immortal realm, they can only live in this space-time. In the past, I released some living beings that had reached the immortal realm into the outside world, but they could not accept it at all. They either went mad and self-destructed, or they could not accept the truth and went on a killing spree. In the end, they were destroyed. Thus, I could only restrict them in this space-time. They are the strongest of the immortal realm life forms. Living down, there has already broken the balance, so they can only be left by their side, said the beak coffin in a strange tone. When Luo Fan heard this, he immediately knew the crux of the matter. It was definitely because the laws of this space-time were too perfect. It had already reached a certain degree of stability and became incompatible with the outside world. As a result, the living beings that cultivated here could not accept the different laws of the outside world, could not accept the different space-time outside, and could not accept the fact that the world they lived in was just someone else's creation. That was why the immortal realm life forms behaved like this after leaving the space-time. Fellow Taoist, have you thought of a way? Asked Luo Fan. He believed that the beak coffin would understand what he meant. As expected, the beak coffin immediately understood Luo Fan's intentions. It shook its head and sighed. There is no other way. Now that this space-time has become one, its laws and laws have all stabilized. Even I, the creator, cannot change those laws and laws unless the entire space-time is destroyed. These words seemed to be an excuse, but Luo Fan did not think so. In fact, he felt that it was only reasonable this way. It seemed difficult to construct a space-time, but in fact, it was not a difficult project for existences like Luo Fan as long as they found a suitable point. As long as there were suitable materials, as long as there was a suitable location, and as long as a certain amount of energy was expended, success would follow naturally. However, once the space-time was successfully created, it would naturally attract all existences that were beneficial to it to perfect itself, making the space-time stronger, more complete, more stable, and more difficult to break. As long as the environment was right, this process of growth was almost limitless. It could never stop. If the comprehension of the life form that created this space-time lagged behind the space-time's development, then there would come a day when the space-time strength would surpass the life form's control. When that happened, the life form that created the space-time would have countless conveniences, privileges, and even almost omnipotence, but it would no longer be able to truly change the nature of space-time. The beat coffin's relationship with this space-time had clearly reached that stage. This space-time was so perfect and profound, so stable that even an 8th rank immortal would not be able to change it. The beat coffin was only a 7th rank immortal, so it was naturally powerless. This was the tip of the iceberg from how the beat coffin had to use the path of light to connect Luo Fan and the 8 Yuan into this space-time. That's a pity, Luo Fan sighed. He understood why the beat coffin had stayed here for over 300 million years. Apart from comprehending the path of creation, it was being held back by this space-time. It wanted to leave, but was reluctant to do so. It wanted to take this space-time away, but was unable to do so. It wanted to destroy it, but could not bring itself to do so. As a result, it could only be held back. The beat coffin was quite intelligent. It could understand Luo Fan's words without needing to be explained. It naturally understood what Luo Fan was trying to say. It could only smile wryly. I've been too indecisive. It's been hundreds of millions of years of hard work. Let alone fellow Taoist Tao. Even I can't bear to part with it, said Luo Fan with a smile. As they spoke, they entered a building. As soon as they set foot in the building, countless strange and mystical voices echoed through the air. The voices contained countless inconceivable mysteries. It was as if they were describing the laws of the world, making Luo Fan feel refreshed. So, it's the wisdom fruit. Looks like I've stolen fellow Taoist's wisdom fruit this time, thought Luo Fan. He seemed to have understood something and sighed. As it turned out, the boundless light that made up the building was mixed with countless lights that did not originate from the bird's nest. However, these lights were even more mystical and inconceivable. Those lights were very familiar to Luo Fan. They were the lights he had sensed over the past few days. They were the lights formed by the wisdom fruit. Understanding the existence of these lights, Luo Fan naturally understood why the beat coffin noticed him the moment he stepped into the vicinity of the wisdom tree and paid attention to him. It was clear that the beat coffin had been plucking the ripened wisdom fruits at some point and refining their lights into the building. When he sensed the process of the wisdom fruit entering the world, it was equivalent to stopping the beat coffin from plucking the wisdom fruit. Not only that, but Bai Yuan had also directly taken the wisdom fruit that the beat coffin had been guarding for a long time. This was why he had said those words. Why do you say that, fellow Taoist? I did not plant the wisdom tree, so the wisdom fruit naturally does not belong to me alone. What do you mean by stealing it? The beat coffin smiled. At this moment, only the two of them were awake. The moment Bai Yuan stepped into the pavilion, he completely lost all perception of the outside world. His entire soul and mind were completely immersed in the mysterious and indescribable voice that was constantly echoing around him. Bai Yuan was a 3rd stage immortal, and he had just refined a wisdom fruit. Everything about the fruit of wisdom was extremely familiar and intimate to him at this moment. Moreover, the light that made up the building contained an almost endless number of wisdom fruits. Furthermore, he had completely transformed it into the most easily comprehended and most easily activated brilliance. To him, this was simply placing the infinite principles directly in front of him for him to use as he pleased. In this kind of situation, how could he pay any attention to the outside world? You are a very incompetent servant. The beak coffin occasionally glanced at Ba Yuan's appearance and smiled at Luo Fan. Why would existences like us need someone to serve us? It's just that I've spent a lot of effort to bring him along. It doesn't matter if I'm incompetent or not. Luo Fan looked over and also smiled. After the two of them sat down and chatted for a while, the beak coffin finally revealed the real reason why it invited Luo Fan here. I've stayed in the eternal forest for over 300 million years. Since you've just arrived, you must know what has happened in the outside world. I wonder if you can tell me about it. Luo Fan had already guessed that this should be the beak coffin's goal, so he was not surprised at all. He only smiled and said, I usually only know about cultivation and don't know much about the outside world. I'm naturally happy to tell you about it, but I'm afraid it won't be of much help to you. The beak coffin smiled. No matter what, you must know much more than I do. I'll have to trouble you. Luo Fan no longer refused. He immediately told the beak coffin about the various changes in the great heaven origin world over the past 300 million years that he had heard from the sovereign. Back then, Luo Fan had asked the human venerable about everything he knew about the great heaven origin world, including the history of the great heaven origin world. Because it was relatively recent, Luo Fan had explained the changes in the past hundreds of millions of years in great detail. Therefore, Luo Fan did not have to worry about not being able to give the beak coffin an answer. Luo Fan was someone who would respect others tenfold if others respected him, and he would kill his entire family if others glared at him. The beak coffin did not show any malice towards him and even kindly invited him to its cave as a guest. It directly placed the space-time hub in front of him, although he knew that this hub would definitely have all kinds of defenses and that the beak coffin would definitely have many methods to prevent him from controlling the space-time. It was still an extremely kind gesture. Naturally, he would not have any malice towards it. Therefore, he did not hide too much in his explanation. He told the beak coffin everything that did not involve the saints and would not reveal the sovereign's identity. Of course, the sovereign had told him for such a long time because his life was in the hands of Luo Fan. It had to be said that although Luo Fan was kind towards the beak coffin, he would not allow himself to reach the level of the sovereign. Therefore, he only gave a general description and only skimmed over the details. He summarized the words of an ordinary sovereign into a few sentences. Even so, Luo Fan's explanation took nearly 10 hours. For Luo Fan, the endless talk of 10 people was naturally nothing. Whether it was psychologically or physically, he did not feel any trace of pressure. Therefore, after he finished speaking, Luo Fan's expression and movements did not change in the slightest. It was almost as if the previous 10 hours and 10 nights did not exist. The beak coffin's expression kept changing as Luo Fan spoke. It changed from sadness to happiness, anger to happiness, but it was completely immersed in the conversation. When Luo Fan finished speaking, it said with some regret, I didn't think that so many changes would happen in 300 million years. What a pity, what a pity. Chapter 778. When Luo Fan heard this, he knew that it was a pity. Although the changes in the past 300 million years were huge, he couldn't participate in it, so he said it was a pity. Luo Fan didn't feel too much sympathy for this point. After all, the truly huge changes in the heaven origin world in the past 300 million years were caused by existences above the 9th rank of the immortal realm. In this kind of situation, even if the beak coffin participated, it would only be a chess piece. How could it be useful, and how could it be worth looking forward to? However, he naturally wouldn't say these words at this time. Therefore, he only took a sip of the fruit wine that the beak coffin ordered people to bring over and quietly waited for the beak coffin to come back to its senses. The beak coffin sighed for a long time before coming back to its senses. It stood up and bowed towards Luo Fan as it said, Many thanks to fellow cultivator. I didn't think that fellow would know so much about the 817th outer domain. If I knew that fellow knew so much, I wouldn't have been so rude. Luo Fan helped up the beak coffin and said, Fellow doesn't need to be so polite. It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. The beak coffin still had an ashamed expression as it bowed towards Luo Fan before sitting down again, and saying, "This one has stayed here for over 300 million years and has some understanding of the eternal forest. If Fellow doesn't mind, this one can explain it to Fellow. What do you think?" This was exactly what Luo Fan wanted. He was overjoyed when he heard this. He entered the eternal forest to see things he had never seen before. Being able to understand the eternal forest through the words of the beak coffin would give him endless benefits when he walked in the eternal forest. How could he not be happy? The beak coffin chuckled and began to talk endlessly like Luo Fan. The eternal forest was only an insignificant compared to the entire heaven's origin world, but its area was still several billion miles wide. Although the situation wasn't as complicated as the heaven primal world, it wasn't something that could be explained in just a few words. Therefore, it took him 10 days and 10 nights to explain everything he knew. It was also the taboo in the eternal forest that allowed Luo Fan to understand. The advancement of one's cultivation realm was the result of the sublimation of one's life essence. And when one's cultivation realm rose to the level of Luo Fan and Beak Outer Coffin, all of their abilities would receive an inconceivable rise, and their ability to express themselves was naturally no exception. Therefore, both Luo Fan and the Beak Outer Coffin used plain and simple language in their narration, but the information they conveyed was like a complete and clear picture. Even living beings with problems with comprehension could understand the information as if they had seen it with their own eyes. It could even be said that if a master of language was present to listen to their narration, they would be mesmerized by the way they used language. Of course, there wasn't any master of language in this world that could make existences like Luo Fan and Beak Outer Coffin explain these things to them. Only Ba Yuan, who had the opportunity to enjoy all of this, didn't listen to these words at all. At this moment, Ba Yuan was still standing there in a daze, as if he had just entered the pavilion. He closed his eyes, and his mind was completely immersed in the endless brilliance around him, immersed in the incomparably profound voice, and comprehended the truth of the wisdom fruit contained within it. For a third-stage immortal like Ba Yuan, it wasn't a difficult task for 20 nights to concentrate all their energy on one task. It wouldn't even cause him any pressure. However, that task didn't include what Ba Yuan was currently doing. Comprehending the mysteries of the Grand Tao and comprehending the truth contained within the voice, especially the mysteries and truths that he had never experienced before. For a cultivator, these mysteries and truths were equivalent to continuously stuffing more and more food into his already full stomach. The feeling of fullness and the pressure on his body were extremely powerful. One could imagine how much pressure 20 days of comprehension placed on Ba Yuan was. At this moment, although Ba Yuan was still standing in the same manner as before, his aura was showing signs of decline. It fluctuated between high and low, up and down, becoming so weak that it was undetectable at one moment, and then suddenly exploding countless times in the next, becoming so powerful that it was enough to affect the conversation between Luo Fan and Beak Outer Coffin. The heart fire in his body was running amok. If it wasn't for the fact that the heart fire was born from his heart and was completely his power, no matter how it ran amok, it wouldn't cause any real damage to his body. If it were any other power running amok like this, he would have long since suffered from chi deviation, and his body would have directly exploded from the power. But even if the heart fire couldn't truly harm him, he felt that he was nearing his limit. He could feel the extreme pain that the rampaging heart fire brought him, making it almost impossible for him to maintain his previous state of comprehension. Luo Fan and Beak Outer Coffin naturally noticed Ba Yuan's state. However, Luo Fan didn't feel too much about this. To him, this was caused by Ba Yuan himself. If he couldn't control himself, then it was naturally his own doing. He was too lazy to care about it. And if Luo Fan was like this, then what did the Beak Outer Coffin have to do with Ba Yuan? If Luo Fan didn't make a move, then he naturally wouldn't interfere. Therefore, even though Ba Yuan's situation was getting worse, the two of them only continued their conversation and didn't care about Ba Yuan at all. After the Beak Outer Coffin explained the situation in the Eternal Forest to Luo Fan for 10 days, Ba Yuan finally managed to gather his mind and reluctantly left that state. When he opened his eyes again, his eyes were filled with exhaustion and reluctance, but there was also a glow of joy. When he opened his eyes, he didn't care about the current situation as he sat down cross-legged and began to restrain his heart fire. He constantly circulated the heart fire in his body and even used the cultivation method he had exchanged for millions of years with Luo Fan to soothe his mind. He couldn't care about whether his current location was suitable or not. It was a good thing that Luo Fan and the Beak Outer Coffin still had things to say and didn't have time to care about him. Otherwise, just this kind of performance would be enough to make him suffer. Luo Fan and the Beak Outer Coffin glanced at Ba Yuan and no longer cared about him. Luo Fan sighed and said, "I didn't think the situation in the Eternal Forest would be so complicated. It seems like I was too simple before. If it wasn't for fellow Taoists, I'm afraid I would have suffered a big loss." Through the Beak Outer Coffin's explanation, Luo Fan had a general understanding of the situation in the Eternal Forest. He finally understood that he had thought too simply of the Eternal Forest. If he walked in the Eternal Forest with that kind of mentality, he wouldn't know when he would suffer a big loss and destroy his goal of entering the Heaven Primordial world. From this point of view, encountering the Beak Outer Coffin at this moment was a kind of rare luck. The Eternal Forest was so vast that it had even formed a state similar to another world. After countless billions of years of development, it had already formed a completely different system from the Heaven Primordial world. This system was extremely strict and was even more difficult to enter than the Heaven Primordial world. If a living being were to carelessly charge into it and touch the taboo of the system, even a rank 9 immortal would be completely strangled by the system. The entire Eternal Forest and the Heaven Primordial world were divided into 2 regions, the inner region and the outer region. This was normal. After all, it was impossible for the Eternal Forest to be completely isolated from the Heaven Primordial world from the beginning. The various laws within must be of the same origin as the Heaven Primordial world, so there must be some similarities. The inner region encompassed an area of about 600 million kilometers in the deepest part of the Eternal Forest. It occupied about 4% of the entire 3 billion kilometer area of the Eternal Forest. Aside from this 4% area, a total of 96% of the area was the outer region of the Eternal Forest. Similar to the Heaven Primordial world, there was an extremely powerful existence in the inner region that suppressed the order and vitality to maintain the order of the inner region. At the same time, it also maintained the cultivation environment of the inner region, making the inner region a place that was countless times more peaceful than the outer region. As for what this powerful existence was it the legendary divine tree in the outside world, and how powerful it was. Even though the Beak Outer Coffin had been here for more than 300 million years, it had no idea how powerful it was. It could only sense from the eruption of its aura once or twice in the past 300 million years that the existence was at least an existence that surpassed the 9th stage of the immortal realm. Even an 8th-stage immortal was an existence that the Beak Outer Coffin could not defend against. To it, surpassing the 9th stage of the immortal realm was almost a legendary existence. It was not much different from a sage. It did not dare to touch it. Even though it could barely measure its strength, there were more than a dozen 9th-stage immortal realm existences in the Beak Outer Coffin. Even though the Beak Outer Coffin had been here for more than 300 million years, it did not know the exact number. Some said it was 12, some said it was 15, and some said it was 18. In addition to the 9th-stage immortal realm existences, there were hundreds of 8th-stage immortal realm existences. Below them, there were thousands of 7th-stage immortal realm existences. In other words, there were thousands of existences that were no weaker than the Beak Outer Coffin. When he heard this, Luo Fan was shocked. There were actually a few thousand golden immortal realm cultivators living in an area with an area of 600 million kilometers, and such a density was something he'd never imagined before. At the same time, he sensed the strength of the great heaven origin world even more clearly, and a strange thought arose in his heart. Perhaps this is the true appearance of the great heaven origin world. What I experienced in Dragon River City in the southern barbaric lands was merely the tip of the iceberg. Luo Fan's ability to accept things was extremely strong. When he first heard this, he found it hard to accept. But after thinking about it carefully, he understood that this was the only way it could be considered normal. After all, the eternal forest had existed for trillions of years. No one knew how many trillions of years it had been, or whether it had been tens of trillions of years. During such a long period of time, the entire eternal forest was like a black hole that constantly devoured all the cultivators that entered from the outside world. Perhaps only a sage could know how many cultivators had entered the forest over the trillions of years. With such a large number of cultivators existing in this forest, and the eternal forest was so mysterious that it could produce thousands of cultivators at the third stage of the Zenith Heaven realm, what was there to be surprised about? There were thousands of cultivators at the third stage of the Zenith Heaven realm in the inner region, yet it was able to maintain peace and order. This was enough to show how powerful the existence that surpassed the ninth stage of the immortal realm was, and how brilliant its methods were. Apart from the inner region, 96% of the eternal forest was the outer region of the eternal forest. Because the powerful existence didn't care about the order of the outer region of the eternal forest, including the area where Luo Fan and the Beat Coffin were, was almost without order. It was a world where the strong preyed on the weak, just like the outer region of the Great Tianyuan world. Although Luo Fan didn't sense any malicious aura during his time in the Eternal Forest, he felt that the outer region was peaceful. In fact, the reason why it was so peaceful and calm was because this was actually the Beat Coffin's territory. It was because the Beat Coffin was suppressing it here that it appeared so peaceful and peaceful. If Luo Fan didn't choose this direction to enter the Eternal Forest and didn't choose the Beat Coffin's territory, he would probably have to experience at least 3 or 4 battles at this moment. However, that might be a good thing. There might be thousands of territories in the outer region occupied by thousands of powerful cultivators. The closer these cultivators were to the inner region, the stronger they were. Generally speaking, the dozens of areas around the inner region were occupied by cultivators at the 8th stage of the immortal realm. There were even a few areas occupied by 9th stage immortals who were unwilling to enter the inner region. Apart from these 8th and 9th stage immortals, the other areas were occupied by cultivators at the 7th stage and below. The distribution of these territories also ranged from strong to weak. Apart from cultivators like the Beat Coffin who had to stay for some special reasons, the ones occupying these territories were 4th and 5th stage immortals. To Luo Fan, these existences were no different from ants. If they encountered Luo Fan, they would just be sending themselves to his doorstep for him to squash. Of course, these cultivators could be squashed at will by Luo Fan, but for them to be able to establish themselves here, they must have stronger cultivators backing them. There might be 6th, 7th, 8th, or even 9th stage immortals behind them. If he casually squashed them, it would be like smashing a beehive, causing a series of violent reactions. Although Luo Fan wouldn't be afraid, it would still be troublesome. In the process of explaining, the Beat Coffin even described the composition of each territory to Luo Fan, including the affiliation of each territory, allowing Luo Fan to see a huge power distribution map that was divided into tens of thousands of areas. In the end, there were 18 large powers. Looking at this power distribution map, Luo Fan thought to himself, after integrating the subordinate relationships of the various forces, this map of thousands of regions could be unified into 18 rather large groups of forces. Unless there was an existence in the immortal realm of the 9th step, a power group could only unite. If there was no existence in the immortal realm of the 9th step, then there must be several existences in the immortal realm of the 8th step. Only then would they be able to stand firm and not be destroyed. The Beat Coffin didn't want to participate in these power groups, and only wanted to calmly comprehend the path of creation, nurturing the living beings in this space-time like farming. However, with the chaotic order in the outer region of the Eternal Forest, he had to find a power to get close to in order to calmly comprehend the path of creation. However, he was, after all, a 7th stage immortal. Although he was not at the peak among the many factions in the Outland, his strength was not considered weak, and he had some say in the matter. Hence, the faction that he was siding with did not ask him to do too much. As long as it was not a matter of life and death for the faction, he would be able to enjoy a peaceful life here. He would not be forced to do anything. It was clear that the powers here were equal in strength, and even if there were fights, they would restrain each other. Therefore, after entering the eternal forest for over 300 million years, the beak coffin had never encountered a situation that made it lose its calm. It was able to live peacefully in this region. When the beak outer coffin mentioned this, its expression was not one of joy. Instead, it was one of helplessness. This kind of helplessness was not because he had the ambition to participate, but because he had no choice but to get close to a certain power group because of this nominal restriction. Although this restriction had not caused any changes to his living conditions in the past 300 million years, it was a real restriction. It showed that he had to submit to a reality that he could not change. It showed that his strength was not strong enough. It showed that he could not truly change it. It was because of this understanding that he felt so helpless. That was why he showed such a helpless expression. No wonder so many third-stage immortal cultivators would rather abide by the order in the inner region than live in the wider outer region. It was because of this. When Luo Fan thought of the beak outer coffin's helplessness, he instantly came to such a realization. Chapter 779. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved, and he suddenly discovered something that he had overlooked. Text first. The distribution of the eternal forest was roughly the same as the situation in the Great Heaven Origin world. Then, the distribution of power in the forest might also be quite similar to the situation in the Great Heaven Origin world. In this way, the eternal forest might be able to be treated as a miniature Great Heaven Origin world. The various encounters and experiences in the eternal forest might be of great benefit to one's journey in the real Great Heaven Origin world. Thinking of this, he suddenly understood the intention of the powerful existence that was suppressing the entire Great Heaven Origin world. Perhaps he was using this special method to understand how a saint viewed the Great Heaven Origin world and how they controlled the world. At first glance, this kind of understanding did not seem to be of any benefit to one's cultivation, but even Luo Fan understood that when one surpassed the 9 steps of immortality and reached a realm where one had the qualifications to become a saint, perhaps any understanding of a saint could allow a cultivator to break through their limits, break the shackles of the immortality realm, and become a saint. This kind of idea was only a guess that Luo Fan had without much basis, so there was naturally no need to say it out loud. Thus, after learning about the situation in the Eternal Forest, he talked to the beak coffin about some problems related to cultivation and exchanged their views on cultivation. Luo Fan's body was already at the peak of the Daluo Truth Way. If he could perfectly display the power of his divine ability, he would be a supreme existence that surpassed the 9 steps of immortality realm in the Great Heaven Origin world, and he would only be a step away from becoming a saint. His understanding of the Great Tao. His understanding of the Great Tao was naturally not something the beak coffin could compare to. Even if he had only been in the Great Heaven Origin world for a short period of time, this would not change the fact. However, although he had reached an understanding of the Great Tao, his understanding of the Great Tao was not something the beak coffin could compare to, but the beak coffin society had something that Luo Fan could not compare to. After all, he was a cultivator born and raised in the Great Heaven Origin world, and he had stayed in the Eternal Forest for more than 300 million years. Under these circumstances, he had an extremely deep understanding of some of the special rules and laws of the Eternal Forest, as well as the difference between the Great Heaven Origin world and the Eternal Forest. Although this required one to comprehend and understand the Great Tao in heaven and earth. However, the most important thing was the accumulation of experience. Obviously, compared to Luo Fan, who had just entered the Great Heaven Primordial world several dozen miles ago, the beak coffin was clearly stronger. Under such circumstances, the interaction between Luo Fan and the beak coffin wasn't exactly unequal. Both Luo Fan and the beak coffin felt that they had gained a lot. Naturally, the beak outer coffin felt that its gains were much greater than Luo Fan's. It felt that every word from Luo Fan was profound and that it had widened its horizons. For a moment, he felt that many of the problems he had encountered in his cultivation in the past were actually explained by Luo Fan in a few words. He even felt enlightened, and the realm of cultivation that had been stagnant for many years began to loosen slightly. Luo Fan's words had this kind of large benefit to him. Naturally, he also wanted to repay Luo Fan. Naturally, he tried his best to explain to Luo Fan all the principles that he believed were worthy of what Luo Fan had said. But the result was an even bigger blow to him, no matter how profound or how hard it was for him to understand. The principles he had spent so much time to understand, as long as he spoke, Luo Fan could understand them in the shortest amount of time. In just a few breaths of time, he could clearly understand them. Even going one step further, he could explain the principles that the beak outer coffin could not understand in just a few words. It made the beak outer coffin feel like it was not explaining to him, but rather asking for guidance. This kind of feeling was incomparably wonderful, but it also made him feel very embarrassed. In this great heaven primordial world, any living being would be able to find an existence with a cultivation technique that was deeper than theirs. Therefore, any living being could ask a senior expert for guidance. However, this was only in theory. Although there was a senior expert, unless it was a cultivator from a large power or a disciple of a saint, this was only a theoretical possibility for ordinary cultivators. For a cultivator like the beak outer coffin, he knew that there was a senior expert who cultivated the same cultivation technique as him who could give him countless pointers. However, in his hundreds of millions of years of life, he had never seen this kind of senior expert, nor had he received much pointers. The reason he was able to cultivate to this level and have the ability to occupy a certain territory at the edge of the eternal forest was because he had gathered all kinds of information and knowledge. It could be said that he was self-taught. This kind of self-learning ability was naturally praiseworthy, but what he hoped even more was for a senior expert to give him pointers, allowing him to take fewer detours on the road. He would even occasionally think back to his own life and boldly guess that if he had a senior expert to give him pointers, he would have been able to reach his current cultivation realm at least hundreds of millions of years ago. At this moment, directly breaking through from the 7th step to the 8th step should be a matter of time. If that was the case, why would he still need to enter the eternal forest? Why would he still need to be trapped here for hundreds of millions of years? However, this was only an occasional thought. The truth had already happened. Even existences who could travel through time could not change their fate that had already happened. As a result, when he discovered that Luo Fan had wisdom that far surpassed his own cultivation realm, he felt an incomparably wonderful and joyous feeling. However, at the same time, he felt rather awkward. This was because he and Luo Fan referred to each other as fellow cultivator. Was this not constantly showing how arrogant he was when he referred to Luo Fan as fellow cultivator? How could he not feel awkward? In this wonderful, joyful, yet awkward state, Luo Fan and the beak outer coffin continued to communicate. From the beak outer coffin's point of view, he had gained a huge advantage, but only Luo Fan knew. His own gains wouldn't be any less than the beak coffin. What the beak coffin said was something he had pondered over countless times, and he had spent countless amounts of energy to comprehend. Each point had been tempered over and over again. He had refined the eternal forest laws, and even the heaven origin world's laws, and even the heaven origin world's laws, and even the heaven origin world. In terms of realm, these principles were not more profound than the principles that Luo Fan had comprehended. But the way he thought was different. The cultivation characteristics of the great Tianyuan world, and even the various unique applications of the great Tao in the great Tianyuan world, were what Luo Fan lacked. Every single point allowed Luo Fan to have a deeper understanding of the great Tianyuan world and the eternal forest. Not only did this make it easier for him to move around the eternal forest and the great Tianyuan world, it was also more important. These days, he was constantly thinking about the cultivation method he had in the great Tianyuan world. He was getting closer and closer to creating that cultivation method, making that cultivation method more and more complete. Any side of the perfect world, its laws, and even the great Tao would be different from any other world. This kind of difference, if looked at separately, would be different points. It was like as long as each point was different, it would form the difference between two worlds. But in fact, for any perfect world, all the laws, and even the great Tao were an incomparably perfect whole. The laws, and the great Tao affected each other, complemented each other, and fused with each other. If he wanted to completely understand the nature of another world, he needed to completely immerse himself in that world. He needed to completely understand the concepts that had been accumulated over billions of years, as well as accumulate the knowledge of all living beings in that world. Only like this, only then could he truly immerse himself in it, and only then could he truly create something that completely suited that world. At the same time, he would be able to create a peak cultivation method. From this, it could be seen just how important this kind of progress was to Luo Fan. Luo Fan's conversation with the beat coffin continued for several months. During this process, Bai Yuan finally completely adjusted his body and mind and broke away from the state of regulating his breathing. When he returned to his senses, he understood how important the conversation between Luo Fan and the beaked coffin was to him, as well as how great of a fortuitous encounter it was. As such, even though he could not understand most of the conversation between Luo Fan and the beaked coffin, he did not dare to slack off at all. He listened hard, memorized hard, and tried his best to understand, although what he understood was not even a millionth of what he had heard. However, it was that 1 in 10 million chance that made him feel enlightened. He even felt that the principles contained in the countless fruits of wisdom that he had comprehended in the pavilion over the past 20 days were gradually being connected and understood by him. With this kind of harvest, he naturally couldn't let go of every single word that Luo Fan and the beat coffin had said. For a time, he was drenched in sweat and exhausted. He tried his best to engrave every single word that Luo Fan and the beat coffin had said into the depths of his soul. The reason why he remembered so painstakingly was because although Luo Fan and the beat coffin hadn't used their own power to activate any sort of divine might, whenever their words corresponded to some sort of rule, law, or great Tao, the world would naturally echo them. They would naturally possess some sort of profound power that was difficult for others to remember. As a result, Bai Yuan had to expend a great deal of effort to engrave them into the depths of his soul. Neither Luo Fan nor the beat coffin cared about Bai Yuan listening to them. If his cultivation wasn't high enough, he wouldn't gain much even if he memorized the words. No matter how much Bai Yuan remembered, he could only understand as much as he could. He wouldn't be able to break through the limits of his comprehension just because he remembered more. Naturally, he didn't care. Several months later, when Luo Fan felt that he couldn't gain much from the beat coffin anymore, he finally stopped talking to it. Although the beat coffin felt that continuing would definitely be of great benefit to him, he'd long since accepted Luo Fan's superiority over the past few months. Since Luo Fan wasn't willing to continue, he couldn't force him to. Thus, he could only reluctantly stop. For a time, the only sound in the pavilion was Bai Yuan's heavy breathing. Bai Yuan's face was pale. Although his eyes were filled with excitement and joy, he was drenched in cold sweat and swayed. He could collapse at any moment. Fellow Taoist, you've answered countless of my questions and swept away countless obstacles in my path of cultivation. You've truly given me a new lease on life. If you don't show me some gratitude, I'm truly uneasy. This is a map of a primordial ruin that I paid a huge price for. I was planning to venture there when I couldn't make a breakthrough. After listening to fellow Taoist advice for the past few months, I've found a way to make a breakthrough. I don't need to venture there anymore. If fellow Taoist is interested, I have the time to do so. If you're interested, I can go and take a look. The beat coffin listened for a long while, then finally gritted its teeth and took out a leather scroll similar to the map Luo Fan had bought. Luo Fan wasn't too interested in the primordial ruin itself. However, the moment he saw the leather scroll, he suddenly faintly sensed an extremely obscure and mysterious aura from it. If not for the fact that his perception was extremely fine, he wouldn't have been able to sense it with his perception in the great primal heaven and earth. Thus, he couldn't help but be interested. I don't know what existence left this presence behind, but since it's so mysterious and obscure, there must be a deeper secret. With that thought, he changed his mind. He said with a smile, I shouldn't take what fellow Taoist loves, but this map has touched my heart a bit. I'll shamelessly accept it. The beat coffin was originally a bit reluctant, but when it heard Luo Fan's words, that reluctance finally disappeared. A sincere look of joy appeared on its face as it said, since fellow Taoist heart has been touched, the primordial ruin must be fated with fellow Taoist. I must have been waiting for fellow Taoist to come after obtaining this map, so it's only right to hand it over to fellow Taoist. Saying this, it placed the leather scroll in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't believe the beat coffin's words, but since he had already decided to accept this map, he naturally wouldn't change his mind. He took the map and unfurled the beat coffin. After taking a glance, he found that this map showed a corner of the eternal forest. The terrain was uneven and there were many ancient trees covering the ground, but the main part was underground. Roughly estimating, the map showed an area of several dozen kilometers above the ground. However, just a portion of the map showed an area of several tens of thousands of kilometers underground. In fact, it even went several hundred kilometers deep into the ground. In front of the beat coffin, he naturally couldn't study the mysterious aura hidden in the depths of the leather scroll. Therefore, he only took a glance at the map and had a general impression of the location before putting the map away in his sleeve. Luo Fan was not surprised by the existence of the primordial ruin in the eternal forest. He didn't feel it was strange or awkward at all. In fact, he even felt that it was normal for the existence of the primordial ruin to exist. After all, the eternal forest had existed for a very long time, and there were many experts that had appeared. It was a world even more powerful than the great desolate world. In this kind of situation, it wasn't strange for there to be a ruin left behind by a powerful cultivator from a long time ago. After putting away the map, Luo Fan bade farewell. I've already disturbed fellow cultivator for several months, and it's not good to disturb you any longer. I'll be taking my leave today. Although the beat coffin was reluctant, it knew that Luo Fan had to leave. Therefore, after urging him to stay, it reluctantly activated the path of light and personally sent Luo Fan and Ba Yuan out of his cave abode and out of that mysterious space-time. My territory covered a radius of over 7 million miles. It's considered a relatively large territory in this area. However, even though I stand aloof from worldly affairs, I can't give others a sense of security, so there aren't many cultivators attached to me. There shouldn't be too many obstructions on your way, but once you leave my territory, you have to be careful. Although the cultivators in the nearby territories aren't much to you, they have layers of backing after all, so you don't have to be afraid. However, if you have conflicts with them, it will be a hindrance to you after all, so you can't be careless. The beat coffin was still very worried in the end. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't be impatient with this kind of concern, so he only smiled and said that he understood. Then he told the beat coffin to take care of itself while he leisurely left in a certain direction with Ba Yuan. Looking at the direction Luo Fan was heading in, the beat coffin sighed. It recognized that they were heading in the direction of the primordial ruins and understood that Luo Fan's destination was most likely the primordial ruins. It couldn't help but feel nervous. It didn't know if giving the map to Luo Fan was good or bad for him. The map only contained a portion of the primordial ruins, and it was only a very, very small portion. Just this small portion of the map had already been explored by countless beings in the eternal forest countless years after the ruins have been discovered, using countless lives and countless amounts of blood. According to the most conservative estimate, the ruins were at least 100 times larger than the area covered by the map. If one relied on the map, it would be impossible to completely explore the primordial ruins. If one relied on the map to enter, they would still encounter many dangers, and it would be impossible to be completely safe. Under these circumstances, Luo Fan had headed to the Primordial ruins as soon as he obtained the map, planning to explore it. How could the beak coffin not worry? After worrying for a long time, the beak coffin finally suppressed this worry, and it sighed before turning around and summoning the path of light before returning to its abode. No matter what the outcome of Luo Fan's battle was, he'd already done everything he could, so it was useless to continue worrying, so there was naturally no need for him to be in a daze. To be continued, Chapter 780. At this moment, Luo Fan naturally did not care about the beak coffin. The only thing he was thinking about was the map and the aura hidden on it. The primordial relic is not in the beak outer coffin's territory. Instead, they are located at the border of a few territories around 70 to 80 million kilometers away from the beak coffin's territory. Those territories were only occupied by rank 6 immortals, but each territory belonged to one of the outer domain's forces. Moreover, they were all in conflict with each other. Because of that location was not peaceful at all. From time to time, there would be fights over the ancient ruins, and from time to time, cultivators would die because of some seemingly ridiculous reason. Even with Luo Fan's abilities, he had to be careful when heading to that place. After all, if he was not careful, what awaited him might be the joint hostility of the outer domain's forces. For Luo Fan, this was clearly not something worth looking forward to. 70 to 80 million kilometers was naturally nothing in the great heaven primordial world. Even the distance between two ordinary cities was not much shorter than this. However, in the Eternal Forest, this distance was already considered quite long. Along the way, there were at least 30 to 40 forces territories. Because the route Luo Fan had chosen was directly towards the ancient ruins, the territories he passed through were intertwined. They did not belong to the same large force, but belonged to large forces that had a lot of enmity with each other. Because of the enmity between the forces backing them, it was naturally impossible for these territories to be very peaceful. Although there wouldn't be as many battles as in the primordial ruins, it was still unavoidable for some small battles to occur occasionally. Through communicating with the beak coffin, Luo Fan had a deeper understanding of the living conditions of the Eternal Forest creatures. As such, he also understood that it was not a mistake for him to only sense a few powerful auras in the forest. Instead, it was because those cultivators had opened up cave dwellings somewhere in the forest by themselves or with other creatures. These cave dwellings, even the weakest living beings, could be concealed by all sorts of other auras. That was a powerful living being. For example, existences in the upper rank 3 immortal realm could even open up their own space-time to use as cave dwellings. Although the Eternal Forest looked very peaceful and had countless heavenly materials, the more powerful the cultivator, the smaller the Eternal Forest. The more powerful the cultivator, the smaller the Eternal Forest. If someone with an enemy lived in the forest, it would be like living next to their enemy. Unless they had absolute confidence or an unimaginable existence, most cultivators would rather hide in their cave dwellings. They would only leave their cave dwellings and appear in the forest when necessary. As a result, there were not many auras that could be revealed without any worries. Even if Luo Fan did not put much thought into it, he would still be able to sense them. As Luo Fan walked along the way, he poured his thoughts in a universe in the sleeve and carefully sensed the map of the primordial ruins that he had obtained from the beak coffin. That map was created by many cultivators using their lives. It was not naturally created by the ruins. It should not have much to do with the owner of the ruins. However, this did not mean that the owner of the map was a simple existence. It did not mean that the value of the map was small. After all, even if this map was not innately created by the ancient ruins, its owner was very likely to be more powerful than Luo Fan. Even from the aura hidden on this map, the owner of this map might not have left this map just to mark the ancient ruins. Instead, he might have had more thoughts and plans within it. This was what Luo Fan was interested in. Although Luo Fan was somewhat interested in the primordial ruins, it was impossible for him to go there directly. He would only let him casually go down and take a look when he passed by that location. Luo Fan's world in his sleeve was a space that could accommodate living beings. It was extremely vast. It would not be a problem for it to contain several dozen mountains. After dozens of days, Luo Fan's universe creator already had a lot of tools in his sleeve. The map was currently in a corner of these artifacts. It floated in the void like an extremely ordinary leather scroll. Luo Fan wrapped his thought around the map and suddenly shook. In an instant, it invaded the map. The map was also an artifact, and the sacrificial refining method was similar to the one Luo Fan had bought from the Myriad Tool Pavilion. It was also refined using a sacrificial refining method, but the sacrificial refining method of this artifact was different from the one in the Myriad Tool Pavilion's map. This magic tool had 72 layers of restrictions. It was only one step away from becoming a magic treasure. If it was in the 10,000 Weapons Pavilion, just this alone would be extremely precious. However, to an existence at Luo Fan's level, it was only similar to a spell that he could casually use. This was why the coffin had directly given it to Luo Fan. Luo Fan's thought continued to penetrate the layers of restrictions on the magic tool. He continued to analyze and search for the deeper secrets hidden behind the restrictions. This was not a simple matter. If it was simple, the coffin would have discovered this leather scroll a long time ago. It would not have waited for Luo Fan to study the secrets behind it. As the analysis deepened, Luo Fan's thought gradually approached the core restriction. Restrictions were refined from the outside to the inside, which meant that the first layer was usually the outermost layer of restrictions. The later layers of restrictions were closer to the core of the restriction, and the deeper the restrictions were, the closer they were to the core of the restriction. The core of the magic treasure was the 72nd restriction of the magic treasure. If there was any secret, it was most likely to be in this restriction. These 72 restrictions formed an incomparably complete whole. All the restrictions were incomparably closely connected. Even the power between them changed slightly as they flowed. A total of 72 restrictions were formed. If the 72 restrictive spells could be refined into a magical treasure, then the 72 restrictive spells must be refined into one, transforming into some mysterious and unfathomable existence. If that kind of existence existed in the untainted land of heaven and earth, it would be the treasure spirit of the magical treasure. But in the great Tianyuan world, there could not be a treasure spirit. Therefore, it would form a magical treasure heart with a powerful spirit and power. The 72nd restriction was not much different from the 71 restrictions that Luo Fan had analyzed before. In fact, it could even be said to be exactly the same. Very soon, Luo Fan completely analyzed it. After analyzing it, the entire magic tool seemed to have no more secrets in front of Luo Fan. It seemed to be purely a magic tool that carried information. The restrictions seemed to be purely information-carrying restrictions. Everything was so natural, so ordinary, and no one could find a trace of error. Luo Fan did not feel discouraged at all. In fact, he had long since expected this. If he could find a secret behind just by analyzing it, why would the beat coffin wait for Luo Fan to find it? He used the extraordinary sensing ability that came with his body to carefully sense the entire magic tool. He sensed the extremely obscure source of the aura. The aura was indistinct. Only when he focused all of his attention could he faintly sense the traces left behind. If he was careless, or did not discover the existence of the aura first, perhaps Luo Fan would no longer have any doubts about the magic tool's ordinary nature. However, he had already sensed it when he first saw the map. Naturally, he could not ignore it now. As he probed deeper, he finally sensed the source of the aura. That was the interior of the 72nd restriction. He believed that it was the last restriction of the magic tool, the deepest core. With this discovery, how could Luo Fan not understand? His intuition was not wrong at all. This magic tool was indeed not an ordinary magic tool. There was an even deeper secret hidden within it. With a thought, he left the heaven and earth within the sleeve and said to Ba Yuan, who had a tired and pained expression on his face, "Let's find a place to rest for a while before moving forward." Ba Yuan had spent a great deal of effort memorizing the communication between Luo Fan and the beat coffin. He was almost at the end of his rope and had no time to rest. Along the way, he had almost fainted several times. However, because Luo Fan continued to move forward without a care, he did not dare to say that he wanted to rest. He could only force himself to follow behind Luo Fan. At this time, hearing Luo Fan's words, he couldn't ask for more and reluctantly agreed. He reluctantly agreed and looked around. He was looking for a close place to rest. At this moment, half an hour had passed since they had bid farewell to the beak coffin. Although the two of them were moving forward at a moderate pace, their speed was still quite astonishing. They had long since left the beak coffin's territory and had even passed through 2 or 3 territories. The place they were currently in belonged to a 5th-stage immortal. Although this 5th-stage immortal did not stand aloof from worldly affairs like the beak coffin, he was a rather peaceful person. As a result, the living beings that moved about in this territory, which spanned nearly 1,000,000 kilometers, were generally only at the mortal realm. In fact, most of them were only plants. Even Ba Yuan could live quite comfortably here, let alone the two of them who were walking together. Thus, they did not encounter any disturbances along the way. Ba Yuan looked around and discovered a rather spacious and quiet place a few dozen steps away. He reported to Luo Fan and led Luo Fan to that place. After Luo Fan sat down, Ba Yuan plopped down on the ground and panted heavily. The aura around him fluctuated, and the boundless Hotian Yuan Qi, which was filled with vitality, was quickly condensed, burned, and infused into his heart flame. Then, with the help of the excitement of the heart flame, he worked hard to recover his nearly exhausted mind. Luo Fan naturally did not care about Ba Yuan. After he sat down, he casually pointed at the surroundings, and an invisible formation guarded them. His and Ba Yuan's auras instantly disappeared without a trace. Even if the living beings that saw them with their own eyes, they might not be able to detect them due to the disappearance of their auras. Once he was done, he waved his hand, and the map of the primordial ruins appeared in his hand. The map contained even more secrets hidden in the depths of the 70-second restriction. This was not something he could find with a single thought. Thus, he had no choice but to take it out and personally study the map. Luo Fan had already memorized all the information displayed on the map. Thus, it could be said that the information displayed on the map no longer held any meaning for Luo Fan. After Luo Fan took out the map, he raised his hand and pointed at it. A mysterious power surged into the map, and it shook violently. The map shook with a loud bang, and countless symbols appeared on it. In an instant, the entire magic tool collapsed with a loud bang. It turned into a dense, almost infinite number of mysterious symbols. These mysterious symbols were divided into layers and layers, forming a 3-dimensional, almost spherical, giant pattern. It was precisely the layers of restrictions contained in this map that Luo Fan had directly taken out. The number of layers in this ball-shaped pattern was none other than 72 layers. With a wave of his hand, Luo Fan brushed the 72 restrictions aside and froze. It turned into an extremely complicated sphere that was the size of a human head. It was the product of the combination of those restrictions. Normally, these restrictions were the entirety of the magic tool. Once the restrictions were removed, there should be nothing left of the magic tool. All that was left was nothingness. The magic tool's materials had already fused with the restrictions and became a part of them. Therefore, there would be no leftover materials. However, at this moment, after the 72 restrictions on the map had disappeared, the map began to tremble. What was left behind was not nothingness, but some kind of mysterious existence that was left behind. That existence was a faintly discernible speck of light. This speck of light was incorporeal, as if it didn't exist at all, but it was there. Not to mention Luo Fan. Even Ba Yuan, who was exhausted to death, could easily see its existence. Finally caught it. Luo Fan looked at the speck of light and smiled. That speck of light naturally couldn't be anything else. It was the source of the aura that had caught his attention. He raised his hand, and the speck of light trembled slightly, then gradually floated towards him. Just as the speck of light was about to fall into his hand, a strong vibration suddenly spread out from the speck of light. Then, the speck of light suddenly expanded thousands of times. From a small speck, it suddenly expanded into a sphere with a diameter of several tens of feet. Then the 72 restrictions that Luo Fan had brushed aside shook violently. As if they were being pulled by some kind of force, they suddenly collapsed. Like a long stream, they rushed towards the intangible sphere and directly rushed into it. As these restrictive spells rushed in, the sphere slightly twisted, constantly changing and constantly compressing. In the end, it turned into a 3-meter-long triangular flag. On the black flag, there was a bloody, large word seal that belonged to the ancient era of the great heaven primordial world. When this flag appeared, an incomparably powerful aura rushed out from the triangular flag and swept across the surroundings like a hurricane. It even scraped off a thick layer of the ground, causing the open space to sink by a few feet. Fortunately, Luo Fan had already set up the array to block all the aura generated from inside. Otherwise, if this aura had swept across like this, it would have been sensed by all the creatures in the eternal forest. This would have caused a lot of trouble. It's actually a primordial unity mysterious treasure. Moreover, according to the classification method of the great heaven primordial world, it's even a rank 6 magic treasure. The aura of the vertical flag naturally couldn't harm Luo Fan, but Luo Fan still felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Even in the great heaven primordial world, even the worst first-grade magic treasure wasn't a common item. Second and third-grade magic treasures were 10 or even 100 times rarer than first-grade magic treasures. Fifth and sixth-grade magic treasures were already extremely rare, to the point where only the great powers could possess them. But at this moment, Luo Fan suddenly discovered an extremely rare treasure inside a magic tool with 72 restrictions. It was so rare that it was enough to make the great forces of the great heaven primordial world, who possessed powerful existences that surpassed the 9th stage of the immortal realm, to fight over it. How could Luo Fan not have any reaction to this? For a mere 7th grade immortal to be able to discover your excellency, it's really beyond your excellency's expectations. Fine, since you've discovered your excellency, it can be considered as meeting master's requirements. Old master's inheritance will be handed over to you. Quickly kneel down and kowtow to your excellency. An ancient voice came from the triangular flag. When Luo Fan heard the voice, his brows furrowed. He was naturally quite unhappy with the words coming from the triangular flag, but what made him frown was not the words, but the fact that the triangular flag could speak. The great way of the great heaven primordial world is different from that of the untainted land. It's impossible for a magic treasure to produce a complete spiritual consciousness, and it's impossible for it to produce a treasure spirit with complete thinking. Although this magic treasure is a primordial unity treasure, it's no exception. How could such a complete spiritual consciousness appear? Could it be just a little spiritual consciousness left by the magic treasure's owner? With this thought in mind, Luo Fan made a grabbing motion. The vast power in his body shook and instantly locked the space-time. With the infinite power of the space-time, he directly restrained the triangular flag. Then, with a light wave of his hand, the triangular flag slowly floated into his hand. During this process, the triangular flag struggled violently. Wave after wave of powerful forces madly rushed out, frantically resisting the powerful locking ability of the surrounding space-time. This is deceiving your master. Quickly let go of your excellency. Your excellency will spare you this time. In the process of struggling, the triangular flag continued to emit such voices, but there was already a lot of panic in them. To be continued, Chapter 781. Why would Luo Fan care about what the flag said? Although the flag possessed the supreme might of a 6th-tier magic treasure, it could even attract the attention of a major faction in the great primal heaven world in an attempt to seize it. He had already set up a formation here, and the power of Luo Fan's divine ability surpassed that of an ordinary 7th-tier immortal. Therefore, no matter how much the flag struggled, it could not break free from Luo Fan's grasp. Although it was panicking, it could only make some sounds and could not truly break free from his grasp. As soon as the triangular flag was in his hand, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. This triangular flag was also refined using the restriction sacrificial refinement method, but the restriction used was not the one used on the previous map scroll. I didn't expect to see a magic treasure refined using this restriction here. It's really rare. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. In the untainted world, he had refined several magic treasures using the restriction sacrificial refining method. There were also many magic treasures refined by other disciples. In that place, he did not feel too much about the magic treasures refined using this method. At most, he felt that the magic treasures were quite mysterious. However, he was currently in the Great Tianyuan world, a world where the rules, laws, and even the Great Tao were completely different from the untainted world. In this place, the restriction refining method was not the mainstream refining method in the untainted land. It was just an unorthodox refining method. Even the celestial tools refined by this method did not have a complete treasure spirit, so it was impossible for them to produce a complete spiritual sense. In a place like this, magic treasures refined using the restriction refining method were naturally extremely rare. At this moment, the magic treasure in Luo Fan's hand was such a magic treasure. This magic treasure even seemed to have a complete treasure spirit. How could Luo Fan not be surprised? How could he not feel that things remained the same? But people had changed. Release your holiness. You have already deceived your master and destroyed your ancestors. If I kowtow and admit my mistake, his honor will pardon me. If not, his honor will show his might. Countless years of cultivation will be gone. You have to think this through. Although the triangular flag could not hide his fear, he still said so. Luo Fan naturally did not care about his words at all. With a wave of his hand, a wave of power directly entered the magic treasure, constantly invading it, but he could not be bothered to communicate with him. He immediately began to refine the magic treasure. Ba Yuan, who was standing at the side, was almost unable to withstand the aura emitted by the triangular flag. He fell to the ground. At this moment, the triangular flag was frantically struggling and roaring with all its might. Although the aura didn't become stronger, it was restrained and didn't leak out. Instead, it became more condensed. As such, the range of its spread was naturally reduced by a lot, and the environmental changes it caused were also significantly weaker. However, the pressure it exerted on the surrounding living beings had become even greater. As for the 8 Yuan, it was clearly within the scope of this surrounding. Therefore, at this moment, Ba Yuan appeared to be in an even more sorry state. His entire body was almost slumped to the ground, and his expression was pained. His entire body could not even tremble. However, although he was in such a sorry state, he did not completely lose his perception of the outside world. Regarding the words of the triangular flag, as well as Luo Fan's actions, he had completely seen them. All of this made him feel like he was in a dream. He could not believe what he saw in front of him. He could not believe that the triangular flag was really speaking. He could not believe that the triangular flag's powerful aura was actually needed so casually by Luo Fan, as if it was nothing. Ba Yuan was an orthodox living being of the Great Tianyuan world. His understanding of cultivation, magic tools, magic treasures, and even everything about the outside world was no different from the orthodox of the Great Tianyuan world. Therefore, to him, magic treasures were just items that had more spirituality and were thousands of times more powerful than magic treasures. He had never thought that magic treasures could freely communicate with living beings. To him, this situation had already subverted all of his concepts. It made him feel that all the rules and principles that he previously believed to be right and proper were now like farts. Of course, this feeling was extremely uncomfortable. His eyes naturally emitted a psychedelic light of shock and horror. How can magic treasures have intelligence? Such a thought appeared in Ba Yuan's mind. To him, creating living beings was still an unimaginable and unimaginably great magical ability. However, refining magic treasures was not too difficult for him, except that it took a lot of time. To him, if magic treasures could have intelligence, then what difference was there between them and real living beings? If he could find this method, then wouldn't a first-stage immortal also have the great magical ability to create living beings? These thoughts were like tarsal maggots. After that one thought flashed through his mind, they came one after another and entangled his mind, making it impossible for him to get rid of them. At this moment, Luo Fan naturally did not care about what Bai Yuan was thinking. All of his attention was focused on a magic treasure that looked like a triangular flag in his hand. The artifact was refined using a restriction refining method, and artifacts refined using a restriction refining method were extremely rare in the Great Tianyuan world. No matter how powerful the living beings of the Great Tianyuan world were, they would not be able to forcefully refine the artifact unless they had a large amount of time to study and experiment with it. Otherwise, they would not be able to forcefully refine the artifact if the artifact's spirit was unwilling to do so. But Luo Fan was different. In the untainted land where Luo Fan came from, the restrictive refining method was the most orthodox and mainstream method of refining tools. He even used this method to create tens of thousands of restrictive refining methods, and even refined several magic treasures from scratch, so that several of his disciples could learn the restrictive refining method. With his understanding of the restrictive refining method, if this magic treasure was refined using other methods, he might not be able to do anything to it. However, it was refined using the restrictive refining method, so to him, it was as if it was directly given to him. Under such circumstances, he easily invaded the inside of the magic treasure and began to remove the brand that originally existed in the magic treasure from the outside, leaving behind his own brand. This caused the ownership of the magic treasure to gradually shift from its original owner to his own. Although the triangular flag was originally terrified, he still had some confidence, which was why he could still say such words in such a disadvantageous situation. But at this moment, when he found that he could not resist the vast power of Luo Fan, he suddenly realized how unreliable his previous confidence was. Suddenly, he felt an indescribable despair suddenly appear. For a moment, he panicked and shouted, "Stop! Stop! If you don't want to kneel to the venerable, then don't kneel. There's no need to refine the venerable. If you lose the master's imprint, there is no way to go to the place of inheritance of the master to accept the inheritance." Luo Fan turned a deaf ear to these words, and he did not take it to heart at all. What inheritance? What place of inheritance? What old master? These are like passing wind to him, and could not stay in his mind for a while. For him, unless it was the inheritance of a sage. Otherwise, even if it was the inheritance left by an existence beyond the 9th rank of the immortal realm, it was not as suitable for him as his own research and understanding of the truth. How could he mistreat himself for this inheritance? Therefore, his sacrificial refining of this magic weapon did not slow down because of the words of the magic weapon. At the same time, it did not speed up because of the stimulation. Instead, it continued to go deep into the core of the magic weapon unhurriedly. He constantly removed the remaining imprint in the magic weapon. As a magic weapon, its structure was completely different from a magic weapon. Although it was also constructed by layers of enchantments, these enchantments had undergone earth-shaking changes when it became a magic weapon. Not only had all the enchantments fused into one and become an inseparable whole, but even these enchantments had undergone an indescribable subtle change due to some incredible rule. This subtle change naturally appeared under the influence of the rules of heaven and earth. Unless the magical power was powerful enough to reach the level of a sage that Luo Fan could not imagine, it was impossible to control these changes at all. It could only let the changes appear randomly. These subtle and indescribable changes interweaved in one place, causing the core of the magical treasure formed by the restriction to produce an incredible spiritual sense and intelligence. And it was precisely because these subtle changes appeared randomly under the influence of the rules of the world that this kind of spiritual sense, this kind of wisdom, but it was unique in the world. In other words, even if you repeated the same steps, used the same materials, used the same restrictions, spent the same amount of effort, and use the same amount of energy. In the end, the wisdom and the spiritual sense that was produced could not possibly be the same as this wisp of spiritual sense and this wisdom. The difference between them was like the difference between any two living beings in the world. Although the restriction had undergone such a huge change, to the point that traces of its original form could no longer be seen, it was still formed from a variety of restrictions. For those who were extremely familiar with the refinement of restrictions, such as Luo Fan, it was not difficult for them to find a gap and find a way to start. This was especially true for this magic treasure. Due to the fact that restrictions and refining methods were not mainstream in the Great Tianyuan world, it had not been developed too deeply. Thus, whether it was the restrictions or the refining method, they were not perfect, so it was impossible for the magic treasure to display its full potential. Because of this, the incomparably profound magic weapon that contained boundless secrets was like a sieve in Luo Fan's eyes. It was practically full of holes. He did not even need to think much before he could easily send his power into the magic weapon's core, which was the treasure spirit. For Luo Fan, it was so easy. However, to the triangular flag, his current movements were like him lying there stiffly, allowing the triangular flag's hands to drill into his body from all over. The triangular flag was constantly groping, scraping away some things, and leaving others behind. One could imagine how bad that feeling was. In this way, at the beginning, the treasure spirit could use countless benefits to tempt Luo Fan, hoping to let Luo Fan know that not refining it would allow him to obtain even greater benefits. But later, it gradually found that these benefits could not truly move Luo Fan and could not make him give up. In the end, it completely despaired and began to bitterly beg Luo Fan to let it go. It even made countless conditions because of this. Those conditions added up were actually similar to the effect of being refined by Luo Fan. It also allowed Luo Fan to use this magic weapon perfectly, and it also allowed Luo Fan to become the master of this magic weapon. However, Luo Fan did not have any plans to stop. He continued to refine it, constantly replacing more and more of the mark left by the magic weapon's original owner. The mark of the magic weapon's original owner had an extremely high degree of fusion with the treasure spirit, almost completely fusing with the treasure spirit's restrictions, and was almost inseparable. However, it wasn't very strong. Compared to the mark left by Luo Fan, it was tens of times weaker. This situation showed that when the owner of this magic treasure was refining this magic treasure, its power was at most at the 7th step of the immortal realm, and it was even dozens of times weaker than Luo Fan's current strength. Of course, this did not mean that the magic weapon's original owner was this weak, but it showed that the magic weapon's original owner did not place much importance on it. Otherwise, after one's cultivation realm increased, they would definitely brand their own mark on a magic weapon, and that mark would not be so weak. The magic weapon went from anger, fear, and despair. In the end, after all of its methods were useless, it could only stay silent and numbly wait for Luo Fan to completely refine it. As it fell silent, the aura emitted by the magic treasure was completely withdrawn. The pressure that had enveloped the surroundings and caused Bai Yuan to be unable to get up naturally disappeared without a trace. Bai Yuan was finally able to stand up. He carefully recovered his strength and mind, at the same time watching Luo Fan's actions. He naturally heard the words of the triangular flag. As for the triangular flag's words, he was extremely moved and agreed with it. In his opinion, Luo Fan recklessly refined the triangular flag, branded his own mark on it, and got rid of the mark of its original owner. This was almost a reckless waste of God's gift. If it was him, he felt that he would not be able to hold on until now. It was definitely when the triangular flag's attitude softened for the first time, saying that he didn't need to kowtow and that it would inherit its old master's inheritance, that it had already given up the process of refining it. And it was also because he realized that he was different from Luo Fan. He suddenly faintly felt that this might be where he was inferior to his master. Perhaps it was because of this mentality that he could not truly become a strong person. It made him unable to truly be like the creatures of the foreign realms, who could use a very short period of time to cultivate profound cultivation and powerful divine abilities. However, that was only a vague feeling. If it was just because he saw that Luo Fan's method was different from his, he would be able to understand it and change himself. Then he would not still be a rank 3 immortal, and he would not need to look for his own weakness. Although he had experience, this magic treasure was still a rank 6 magic treasure after all, and the power it could display was close to rank 7. In this case, even if Luo Fan was extremely familiar with refining restrictions, and the magic treasure's restrictions and techniques were even more crude in his eyes, he still spent close to a day before he barely got rid of the mark of the original owner of the magic treasure and branded his own mark on all the restrictions of the magic treasure. As the last mark was successfully branded, all of the marks he had branded before suddenly shook and lit up in an instant. They suddenly strung together to form a complete whole. At this moment, the magic treasure was no longer able to control itself. The brand on its body instantly collapsed and turned into mysterious symbols that completely fused with the brand. The brand and the magic treasure's restriction could no longer be separated from the magic treasure's restriction. At this moment, the triangular flag finally let out a despairing wail and instantly emitted a despairing aura. The entire flag seemed to have become a dead object, and it was difficult to see anything special about it. Luo Fan casually pointed, and the flag floated up. It trembled in the void and instantly turned into a black curtain that covered the sky. It directly enveloped the space inside the formation he had previously set up. The space inside the formation instantly turned into darkness, and all of the vitality inside seemed to be controlled by an indescribably powerful law. It could be controlled by Luo Fan at will, and no living being other than Luo Fan could touch the vitality at all, let alone absorb it or use it. Then a huge seal word flashed in the air. The structure of this seal word was extremely mysterious. It was a three-dimensional form that filled the world and completely filled the void within the range of the black curtain. With the appearance of this seal word, the entire area covered by the black curtain, which was also the area covered by Luo Fan's invisible formation, all the laws, and even the great Tao underwent a wonderful change. This change sealed everything and repelled everything. Any matter, living being, and all energy within this area, except for the magic treasure's owner, completely lost their ability to act on their own. They could only be slaughtered by the magic treasure's owner at will. It's quite a good magic treasure. Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. The seal word around him disappeared, and the black curtain collapsed and disappeared. It once again turned into the triangular flag, which sank down and fell into Luo Fan's hand. It was like a dead object quietly lying there, and there was nothing extraordinary about it. To be continued. Chapter 782. The function of this magic treasure, just like the word engraved on the flag, was to seal. Seal vitality, seal the void, seal the laws, seal everything that was enveloped by it. Text first. Of course, as a Tier 6 magic treasure, the largest area that it could cover was naturally not the same as what Luo Fan had done before, which was only a few hundred feet in radius. In fact, if this magic treasure was fully activated, even in the Eternal Forest, in the Great Tianyuan world, its power would still be able to cover a radius of millions of kilometers. If it was placed in a place that could not compare to the Great Tianyuan world, such as the Great Desolate World, the range would be at least 100 times larger. If it was placed in an even weaker Boundless World, perhaps the entire Boundless World would be directly enveloped. Of course, the wider the range of its power, the weaker the absolute sealing power would be. For example, Luo Fan had previously limited the range of the magic treasure to a few hundred feet, so the power of the magic treasure could at least completely seal a Tier 6 immortal. Even a Tier 7 immortal would be greatly affected, and their strength would be restricted by more than 10%. However, if the range was expanded to a radius of millions of kilometers, then its power would at most be able to restrict a Tier 3 or Tier 4 immortal. It could even restrict the strength of a Tier 5 immortal. Previously, The range of the magic treasure was only a few hundred feet, but it was completely limited by Luo Fan. After all, Luo Fan had only been testing the power of the magic treasure and did not intend to use it to achieve any other goals. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need to activate the magic treasure to its limit and let it completely envelop the entire base. Raising his hand and pointing, the memories and thoughts of the magic treasure directly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. In an instant, Luo Fan completely understood all of the memories of the magic treasure, or rather, all of the information engraved in the magic treasure. In just an instant, he understood the origin of this magic treasure, as well as the truth of this magic treasure. He could not help but laugh and say, "So it's just a map. You actually dare to call yourself venerable, and even dare to say that you want me to kowtow to you. Umph, barbarian, His Excellency has a map of the land of inheritance in his memory. It's the representative of the old master's selection of an inheritor. What's wrong with kowtowing to His Excellency?" The triangular flag struggled to argue. If you don't know anything, how would you know that the place in your memories is the inheritance ground? Luo Fan smiled and said, "At this moment, through the memory of this magic treasure, he already knew that although this triangular flag was a rare magic treasure, it knew almost nothing about its old master. In his memory, there was even no specific appearance of the old master. He could only sense the vast will of the old master. He didn't even know whether the old master was male or female, let alone where the old master was at this time. In his memory, there was only one thing of value. It was a map left behind by the old master. That map was also the map of the Primordial ruins. However, the map was 10 times larger than the one on the surface. Moreover, it was in a very deep place on the map. There was a special mark on it, which was the so-called land of inheritance. Aside from this, Luo Fan didn't find anything else of value in his memory. As a result, how could he not know that the magic treasure was just deceiving him? If he didn't disregard what the magic treasure said and forcefully refined it, making the magic treasure's memory appear in front of him without any concealment, he might really have been deceived and thought that he had obtained great benefits. The triangular flag still wanted to argue, but Luo Fan was too lazy to care about it. He began to carefully analyze the magic treasure's various memories related to when it was refined. These memories still existed, but he didn't have the memories of the person who made it. As he analyzed and deduced the memories of the artifact being refined, he gradually understood why such a relatively complete artifact spirit would appear in the Great Tianyuan world. The reason was like this. The reason was because this magic treasure wasn't refined in the Great Heaven Origin world, but rather in a place that was opposite the Great Heaven Origin world. The laws, and even the Grand Tao were slightly different from the Great Heaven Origin world. In the Eternal Forest. The Eternal Forest was because there were countless ancient trees that had existed for too long. In the process of swallowing the Great Heaven Origin world's origin energy, it gradually distorted the laws, and even the Grand Tao of the Great Heaven Origin world. Because the laws, and the Grand Tao were slightly different from the Great Heaven Origin world, the Eternal Forest was relatively independent of the Great Heaven Origin world. The distorted laws, and the Grand Tao were naturally distorted because the ancient trees had swallowed the origin energy for countless years, so they were biased towards the ancient trees. For plants, for the growth of trees, there were benefits to cultivation that the Great Heaven Origin world did not have. This kind of benefit made it easier for the plants in the Eternal Forest to obtain spiritual sense, gain intelligence, and grow stronger. This kind of change for plants was so rare, so useful, but for cultivation artifacts, it had the same meaning. Magic treasures, from a certain point of view, could also be seen as a kind of plant. They could also grow, they could swallow the origin energy of the outside world, they could also transform origin energy, and they also had a spirit. Because of this, the laws, and even the distorted Grand Tao in the Eternal Forest that were beneficial to plants naturally had a lot of benefits to magic treasures. At this moment, the magic treasure in Luo Fan's hand was able to grow its spirit under the changes of these rules, laws, and the Great Tao. From a typical magic treasure of the great heaven primordial world, it turned into a magic treasure of the primordial world, possessing a treasure spirit that should not exist in the great heaven primordial world. However, this treasure spirit was only born from the laws, and the grand Tao of the eternal forest. Compared to the stable laws of the great heaven origin world, its existence was still too weak. In the eternal forest, it could maintain the existence of a treasure spirit, and it could even continue to grow through refinement. However, once it left the eternal forest and appeared in the outside world, it would be directly exposed to the laws of the great heaven origin world. This treasure spirit would gradually be eroded by the laws, and its spirit would gradually degenerate. In the end, it would transform back into a typical magic treasure of the great heaven origin world. No wonder I haven't heard of magic treasures with treasure spirits in the outside world. Luo Fan sighed, and the enthusiasm in his heart instantly disappeared. Previously, when he saw that this magic treasure had a treasure spirit, there was a faint impulse in his heart. He wanted to find the secret of this magic treasure's treasure spirit, and find a way to refine a magic treasure with a treasure spirit in the great heaven origin world. If it was possible, he wanted to find the connection between the grand Tao of the great heaven origin world and the grand Tao of the great heaven origin world through his comprehension of this method, so that his cultivation could catch up to his own body at the fastest speed possible. It was because of this thought that he would desperately refine this magic treasure. Normally, even if he didn't listen to what the magic treasure said, he wouldn't be so impatient. However, at this moment, he discovered that this magic treasure was only produced because of the changes in the laws of the eternal forest and could only exist in the eternal forest. His original thoughts naturally disappeared, so how could he still have any enthusiasm? As for the meaning of his words, it wasn't hard to understand. A saint's divine ability was unimaginably powerful. As long as there was a change in the world, a saint could simulate it. In other words, this magic treasure could produce a treasure spirit under certain conditions. Then a saint would definitely be able to make the magic treasure produce a treasure spirit. But if the treasure spirit produced by this magic treasure couldn't exist in the world for a long time, it would only continue to weaken with the passage of time. In the end, it would degenerate into a spirit, which would be meaningless to a saint. Of course, a saint wouldn't use the power of time on it. In this world, no one had ever heard of the existence of a treasure spirit, so how could it be strange? As Luo Fan let out a sigh, he casually pointed with his finger, and countless mysterious and indescribable symbols were sent into the triangular flag. The triangular flag slowly floated up after the symbols entered, constantly flashing a mysterious black light in the air. This light trembled. It was like a heartbeat that continued, showing that there were all kinds of indescribable changes happening inside. At this moment, the treasure spirit of the magic treasure let out a moan of pleasure. The sound was so intoxicating that it made one wonder what kind of wonderful thing it was experiencing. So comfortable, this feeling. How can it be so wonderful? The treasure spirit moaned and praised. In a trance, the humiliation it felt for being forcibly refined by Luo Fan disappeared a lot. Instead, it thought that if it could continue to enjoy this wonderful feeling, it wouldn't be bad to be refined by a master like this. The mysterious symbols that came out of Luo Fan's hand numbered in the billions. Like a river, they frantically flowed into the triangular flag. The triangular flag continued to change, and the treasure spirit's moans continued to reverberate. After a few minutes, Luo Fan finally inserted the last symbol. In an instant, the treasure spirit suddenly screamed, and the magic treasure suddenly collapsed. It directly turned into countless extremely complicated symbols that completely linked together to form a perfect whole. It was faintly able to swallow laws, and even grand Taos. This process lasted for a few breaths. After a few breaths, all the symbols condensed again and turned into a triangular flag. However, this triangular flag looked 10 times smaller than before. It was almost like a toy flag fluttering in front of Luo Fan. However, even though it had shrunk by more than 10 times, The aura it gave off was more than 100 times stronger than before. An indescribable pressure spread from the flag, and the surrounding space seemed to be completely locked by the flag's existence. "If we don't act now, when will we?" Luo Fan shouted. The flag shook violently with his shout, and then instantly turned into a 5 or 6-year-old boy who fell to the ground. After the boy landed on the ground, he blinked his eyes a few times and finally understood what had happened to his body. He touched his body, looked at his body, and suddenly laughed out loud. "Ha ha! You have a body! You finally have a born Taoism body! Ha ha!" This boy was the treasure spirit of the triangular flag. Luo Fan looked at the treasure spirit, laughing maniacally, but his expression was very calm as he quietly waited for the treasure spirit to finish laughing. The treasure spirit laughed for a full quarter of an hour. Luo Fan stood there and quietly waited for him for a quarter an hour. During this process, Bai Yuan had already stood up. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. It was as if he was in a dream. Previously, the magic treasure had intelligence and spiritual awareness. This already made him feel incredulous, and he almost wondered if what he saw was an illusion. At this moment, he suddenly saw the magic treasure turn into a creature that looked like a boy. This made him feel even more incredulous. It was even beyond his range of acceptance. For a moment, he didn't know how to react and could only stare blankly. After a quarter of an hour, the treasure spirit finally completely vented its excitement and completely understood its situation. There was a slight struggle on its face, but in the end, it gritted its teeth. It knelt before Luo Fan and said, "Spirit Sealing greets Master. Thank you for your help." The triangular flag had a name. It was called the Spirit Sealing Flag. It was used to seal all sentient beings. According to the rules of the primordial world, the treasure spirit was the Spirit Sealing Boy. However, this was not the primordial world but the Great Tianyuan world. The rules of the primordial world did not extend here. Therefore, the Spirit Sealing Boy only called himself Spirit Sealing. Seeing the boy's performance, Luo Fan finally smiled and said, "Get up. You're pretty smart. You know when to give in and when not to. If you're still not convinced, I can't stay any longer." As for the magic treasure calling itself Spirit Sealing Boy, Luo Fan naturally did not care. Anyway, it was just a name. He did not force the rules of the primordial world to extend here. When the Spirit Sealing Boy heard Luo Fan's words, he could not help but feel a lingering fear. All sentient beings, even the treasure spirits of magic treasures, were afraid of death. They must be extremely huge. There were even some who placed this fear above all the other fears they had encountered in life. Although the Spirit Sealing Boy did not say that this fear was above all the other fears he had encountered, he was also afraid of his own death. He would not be unafraid of death. At that moment, he had been completely refined by Luo Fan. As long as Luo Fan thought about it, he would disintegrate into nothingness. If it was really as Luo Fan had said, he would not be sensible. Then the fate that awaited him would definitely be like what Luo Fan had said. He would be directly erased by him. How could he not be afraid? How could he not be glad that he had made a decision in a split second? "Thank you, Master, for not killing me." At that moment, the Spirit Sealing Boy finally recognized his position and the current situation. He was truly completely obedient. As he spoke, he bowed to Luo Fan and stood up. "Since you have rested enough, let's go." Luo Fan did not look at him and said to Bai Yuan. After a while, Bai Yuan finally realized that Luo Fan was talking to him. His body trembled, and he quickly returned to his senses. He nodded and said, "Yes." Although he felt that he had not recovered to his peak, and it would be better if he rested for a period of time, he did not dare to have any thoughts of disobeying Luo Fan after all the things that had happened before. Naturally, he agreed. Luo Fan naturally saw Bai Yuan's state, but this was also what Bai Yuan had asked for. If he had been able to restrain himself when he was talking to the beak coffin, how could such a situation have occurred at this time? Taking a step back, if Bai Yuan had been able to calm down when he was subduing the Spirit Sealing Flag, he would not be in such a sorry state right now. Since Bai Yuan could not do this, Luo Fan naturally would not waste time waiting for him. casually withdrawing the invisible formation around him. Luo Fan sped up towards the primordial ruins with Bai Yuan, and Feng Ling was the artifact that carried the map of the primordial ruins. Naturally, he was very clear about the path to the primordial ruins. Thus, along the way, he constantly listened to his own opinions and avoided one territory that might cause trouble. Although it was a winding path, it would not cause any major trouble and would not cause any hostile forces to take him to the primordial ruins. Naturally, it was impossible to travel too fast with this method. Luo Fan, along with Bai Yuan and Feng Ling, only arrived at the location of the primordial ruins after 3 days. After 3 days, Luo Fan finally crossed the distance of 70 to 80 million kilometers and arrived at the primordial ruins surrounded by several territories. The moment he saw the primordial ruins, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. Although he had a rough understanding of the state of the primordial ruins through the markings on the map, when he saw the primordial ruins with his own eyes, he realized that looking at the map and looking at the real thing were completely different. The primordial ruins was located in the ruins of a building complex that spanned dozens of kilometers. This was the first time that Luo Fan had seen traces of man-made buildings since he entered the Eternal Forest. Although it was already in ruins, there was still nothing within dozens of kilometers of the ruins. It was as if the ruins were a forbidden area for plants. This kind of situation was naturally nothing special in the Great Tianyuan world and the outside world. Almost all man-made buildings were like this. However, these appeared in the Eternal Forest. Due to the fact that it had existed for too long, the rules, laws, and even the Great Tao had been distorted, thus becoming independent of the Great Tianyuan world. It was quite shocking. To be continued. Chapter 783. There was an area in the Eternal Forest that could not be approached. It was like there was an area in the outside world that had no seawater at all. It had sunk in. It was as inconceivable as that. Text first. After all, the seawater was the absolute main character in the sea, and in the Eternal Forest, the plants were the absolute main characters. There was no difference in the relationship between the two. The surface area of the ruins was only a few dozen miles. This area, compared to the entire Eternal Forest, couldn't even be considered a small point. Luo Fan's eyes swept over it, and he clearly saw the entire ruins. There was not much difference between the appearance of the ancient ruins and the one on the map. Even as small as sand that could be blown away by the wind was not much different. As for the map, it was certain that it had not existed for a year or two, but rather tens of thousands of years. From this, it could be seen that the primordial ruins was indeed extraordinary. If there wasn't an extraordinary power that existed here to suppress everything, how could such a situation have occurred? The surroundings of the ruins were not like the other places where there was only grass and trees. On the contrary, other than the grass and trees, there were the auras of countless creatures. Most of these creatures were hidden. Some were in a formation that had been set up elsewhere, while others were stationed around the ruins casually. At this moment, in an open space several tens of thousands of meters away from where Luo Fan was, there was a camp that was very well integrated with the surroundings. There were many creatures that were lazily moving about in the camp. Most of these creatures had the appearance of born Taoism aptitudes, but there were also some that had the appearance of other strange beasts. There were even a few that looked like treants. They were dozens of feet tall, and there was a faint aura emanating from their bodies. They stood still like ordinary trees. Other than this camp, there were also the auras of many creatures gathered in several other directions. These were clearly the creatures that the surrounding forces had sent to guard the ancient ruins. They must have been here to prevent other creatures from doing anything to the ancient ruins. Or perhaps they wanted to see what benefits the other forces had obtained from the ancient ruins. These plans were very simple and did not require much thought to understand. As for these, Luo Fan naturally did not care too much. Even the strongest among them was only at the 3rd or 4th order immortal realm. This kind of strength was already quite impressive among their respective factions. However, the disparity between his strength and Luo Fan's was so great that the word heaven and earth wasn't enough to describe it. As long as Luo Fan was willing, they would never be able to discover Luo Fan's existence. As a result, even though Luo Fan, Ba Yuan, and Feng Ling were standing there, all of their auras were restricted by Luo Fan and could not leak out. None of the living beings around the ancient ruins noticed Luo Fan and the others. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly. With a casual point of his finger, the three of them disappeared into the void, completely turning invisible and difficult to detect. After that, they stepped into the primordial ruins. As soon as he touched the ground, an indescribable aura rushed up and shook his mind. The entire eternal forest was filled with an ancient aura, but this aura was gradually restrained as one went deeper into the forest. Although it still existed, it would no longer have any effect on living beings. However, at this moment, apart from the ancient aura, the ground of the primordial ruins also contained another aura. It was a kind of majesty, a majesty that deterred everything and made all living beings submit before it. This kind of majesty was extremely powerful. Even Luo Fan felt his mind tremble slightly. That sealed spirit was the treasure spirit of a magic treasure. Although it was no different from a real living being, it was still a treasure spirit. Although it was not different from a real living being, it was not a living being. This kind of majesty did not have much effect on it. It looked around without noticing anything. Its eyes revealed a look of reminiscence. However, Ba Yuan was different from Luo Fan and Feng Ling. He did not have a profound cultivation like Luo Fan, nor did he have a strong mind. In terms of quality, he was completely different from Feng Ling. Therefore, the moment the majestic aura entered his body, he felt an indescribable fear. His body went soft, and he knelt on the ground. He could not withstand the pressure of that majesty and could not control his body at all. Luo Fan looked at Ba Yuan and did not care about him. He turned to look at the primordial ruins, and his eyes revealed a look of admiration. Although that majesty slightly shook his mind, with just a thought, it was enough to completely suppress that majesty. He was not affected at all. Although he wasn't affected, he felt that it was rather mysterious for the primordial ruin to be able to emit such a majestic aura, and he became even more interested in the primordial ruin. As for Ba Yuan, not to mention that he did not care about him. Even if he cared, he would not care about him. After all, this majesty was just the kind of majesty that was casually released by the primordial ruins. This kind of majesty did not have much power at all. As long as he was used to this majesty, although he would still be suppressed, it would not affect him too much. Therefore, there was no need for him to care. Ba Yuan should be able to get used to this majesty very quickly and return to his senses. Sure enough, after a while, Ba Yuan calmed down. He stood up in shame and muttered, "Even the ground has this kind of power. This place is not simple." Feng Ling giggled and replied to his muttering, "Of course, this is the primordial ruins. It has existed for at least hundreds of billions of years." As she spoke, Luo Fan had already brought the two of them to the center of the primordial ruins. Along the way, there were some creatures lying on the ground and studying something. It was clear that they were sent by the surrounding forces to study the ruins. However, these creatures were wholeheartedly paying attention to the primordial ruins. Even if Luo Fan did not hide himself, they would not have noticed them passing by. Therefore, along the way, the three of them did not encounter any abnormalities. They calmly arrived at the center of the primordial ruins. The surface of the primordial ruins was like a camp or a village. It was just that the camp and the village had been built for a very long time and were very sturdy. Moreover, it gave off an ancient aura. The center of the primordial ruins was not a large building, but a plaza. This plaza was only a few hundred feet wide, and the ground was engraved with countless complicated and mysterious lines and symbols. Even at this moment, these lines and symbols were still guiding the endless origin energy in the surroundings. It was still guiding the boundless vital energy in the surroundings, pushing them to circulate, combining them into an extremely mysterious state, and unleashing some kind of unimaginable power. At the center of the plaza, there were two pillars. In the middle of the pillars, there was a staircase that led downwards, leading to the deep and dark underground. The countless symbols and lines on the plaza flowed into the staircase and displayed all sorts of indescribable effects. Aside from these fixed buildings, there were also a few creatures in the plaza. In fact, there were still a few creatures here. These creatures were all treants, and each of them had the cultivation of the fourth order immortal realm. They occupied the two pillars in the middle of the plaza, quietly standing there like a few large trees. This situation was very clear. They were the creatures sent by the various factions to guard the entrance to the true ruins. Luo Fan and the other two were still invisible at this time. With their strength, it was obviously impossible for those treants to discover them. However, even so, after Bai Yuan sensed the aura of those treants, he was still frightened. After all, the weakest of these treants was a level higher than him. It was a huge gap between the third order immortal realm and the third order immortal realm. This kind of existence could practically squash him with one hand. At this moment, they were guarding beside him, and they had to pass through the staircase under their protection. How could this be an easy task for him? Luo Fan did not care about Bai Yuan. He led the two of them through the obstruction of those treants. They arrived at the entrance of the staircase. The staircase was deep and dark. Step by step, it seemed to extend into the endless darkness, into an undetectable and unimaginable abyss. Just by standing at the entrance and thinking about walking in, one would involuntarily feel like they were falling into the abyss. Luo Fan carefully looked at the entrance and realized that it was not without any defenses. In fact, there were hundreds of layers of seals stacked on top of each other. These seals were not very strong, and as long as one had the power of the third order immortal realm, one could easily break through them. However, these seals were not simple. As long as one of the seals was broken, some kind of information would naturally be transmitted through some mysterious and unfathomable channel, communicating with some kind of existence in the distance. As for what existence it was communicating with, it was obvious that it was the rulers of those factions. Even the entrance has such a defense. Looks like they must have obtained countless benefits for below. It's so much so that a few factions have already distributed the benefits. With that thought in mind, Luo Fan did not stop. He made a grabbing motion and instantly tore open a gap in the hundreds of layers of seals. During this process, the seal did not show any signs of abnormality. Not to mention light, there was not even a ripple. This situation naturally did not attract the attention of the surrounding treants. As for whether it would attract the attention of the rulers of those factions in the distance, it would depend on how much attention those rulers paid to the seal. If they only added some simple power to the seal, then Luo Fan's actions would naturally be easily hidden from them. However, if they completely fused their will into it, then no matter how careful Luo Fan was, even if there was no message being transmitted, tearing open the seal would be like tearing apart their will, and they would definitely be aware of it. Regarding this, even Luo Fan did not have any good ideas. However, he did not care. If he could hide from them, it would save him a lot of trouble, which was naturally a good thing. However, if he could not hide from them, it would at most be a little more trouble. In reality, it would not really affect him much. Under such circumstances, why would he care too much? It was just as Luo Fan had expected. When he tore open a gap in the hundreds of layers of seals in a mysterious way, 7 or 8 existences in several mysterious spacetimes that range from tens of thousands of kilometers to thousands of kilometers since the change at the same time. In a spacetime that was completely filled with water, a stage 6 celestial state creature that had transformed into a giant fish and was swimming in it suddenly stopped. It frowned and thought to itself, "It's not our people who tore open the seal of the primordial relic. This technique is definitely not something a stage 6 celestial state creature can do. Forget it. It's not worth fighting such a powerful existence with a relic. If you want to go in, go in." With that thought, it no longer cared about the change. It continued to churn the surface of the sea and did what had been interrupted. Similar thoughts occurred in several other spacetimes. However, this was not the case in a pitch-black spacetime. In that pitch-black spacetime, There was a creature that seemed to be born with Tao aptitude. It was tens of thousands of meters tall and sat cross-legged on the ground. There were traces of trees around it. It raised its eyebrows, and its eyes were red with killing intent. It snorted coldly. "You actually dare to violate our rules. No matter how powerful you are, you will have to pay the price." This creature was also a Stage 6 celestial state creature. It was a Stage 6 celestial state creature that had transformed from an ancient tree. From the size of its body, it could be seen that its strength was definitely not something an ordinary Stage 6 celestial state creature could compare to. Under normal circumstances, it could even challenge ordinary Stage 7 celestial state creatures. This creature had endless killing intent around it, and there was also a thick smell of blood that continuously seeped out. It permeated the entire space-time, causing the entire space-time to be wrapped in its bloody aura. The creature said. It shook. It stood up and raised its feet. The ground of the entire space-time began to shake violently. Impressively, its feet had turned into roots that were inserted into the ground. As it stood up, countless howls suddenly rang out in the space-time. Waves of auras that were originally hidden under its aura soared into the sky, bringing with them crazy and excited howls. It was facing this existence from afar. This existence was the ruler of one of the forces around the primordial ruins. And this space-time was created by this creature. It gave the creatures under it a space-time to live. The excited howls around it were obviously its subordinates. This creature was actually a creature that had transformed from a blood tree after hundreds of millions of years. It was innately bloodthirsty, and it was a tree that had grown by sucking blood. Most of the creatures under his command were of the same nature as him. Thus, this force was in fact the bloodiest and most overbearing force. If it wasn't for the fact that each of the surrounding forces had a powerful backer behind them and that its backer couldn't suppress the other's backer, the other forces wouldn't have been able to confront it here. However, even if it was a confrontation, it still had the absolute upper hand. The other large forces only maintained their interests and didn't suffer any damage. It would be extremely difficult to subdue him, and it was practically impossible. After howling for a while, the blood tree trembled and rapidly shrank. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk into a 10-meter-tall giant. Although his appearance was still different from an ordinary person's, it was much better than his towering appearance from before. After shrinking, the blood tree roared, "Little ones, follow me to kill." The roar echoed throughout the space-time. Following this roar, many of his subordinates around him roared in unison. Their emotions were surging with anger. The blood tree laughed loudly. He raised his hand and tore it open. A huge crack that spanned across the space-time instantly appeared. Behind the crack was the scene of the eternal forest. Following that, the blood tree roared and charged out with his thousands of subordinates. They left this place and entered the eternal forest. Most of his subordinates seemed to have innate Taoism aptitudes, but they were from various races. Many of them had traces of trees. After they left the space-time, their auras erupted wildly, creating a huge whirlwind that swept in all directions from where they were. The trees in the surroundings began to sway in the wind and rain. The blood tree roared and rushed in the direction of the primordial ruins with his many subordinates. With such momentum and the other forces paying close attention to him, how could they not discover him? For a time, wolves flew out and bombarded the bloodwood from all directions. "Bloodwood monarch, what are you doing? Are you trying to provoke a full-scale war between us?" The huge fish from before sent out such a thought. The wills of the other major forces were also similar to this. A creature broke our rules and stepped into the ruins. Since you don't care, the king will naturally take care of it. The Bloodwood monarch released a ferocious will that blasted towards those wills and blasted them back. Do you need to bring all your subordinates to uphold the rules? Although that being is only a rank 7 immortal realm creature, it's impossible for him to be invincible. You bringing a few dozen subordinates is enough to make him restrain himself. What you're doing now is clearly taking this opportunity to bring all your subordinates into the ruins to reap benefits. Quickly stop, or we'll go to war. The fish's thought blasted back again. At the same time, several other thoughts blasted back. They expressed similar intentions. They were all warning the Bloodwood monarch not to take advantage of the situation, to do something they could not tolerate. Hee, you cowards now have the courage to make a move? I said I'm going to uphold the rules. Believe it or not. But if you want war, then let's go to war. Anyway, I'll have something to say when the lawsuit is filed. Hee. The Bloodwood monarch chuckled. To be continued. Chapter 784. At this time, Luo Fan had already stepped into the staircase that extended downwards in the ancient ruins, so he didn't feel much about what was happening outside. He didn't know that the Bloodwood King was leading a large group of people towards the ancient ruins. Text first, the staircase was deep and unfathomable. The staircase led deep into the ground. Just by looking at it, there seemed to be hundreds of thousands of steps. With so many stairs, it was easy to imagine how deep underground it could extend. Regarding this environment, Luo Fan naturally didn't feel anything. After Bai Yuan got used to it, he didn't find it too hard to accept. There was no need to say much about Feng Ling. He was the treasure spirit of the Spirit Sealing Flag, and the Spirit Sealing Flag Club was the magic treasure that came out of the ancient ruins. This could be said to be his home. He only felt a kind of closeness to this environment, only a kind of indescribable familiarity. Naturally, he wouldn't feel anything else. Therefore, the three of them naturally walked downwards. Looking down from above, the staircase was pitch black, as if it led to a boundless abyss. But as they walked up the staircase, as they continued to move forward, the feeling of darkness gradually faded. The surroundings seemed to gradually brighten up. This feeling was so wonderful. If it was an ordinary person, they might feel that the surroundings had really become brighter, but Luo Fan knew that it wasn't that the surroundings had become brighter, it was that the surrounding aura had changed. It was the aura of the surroundings that added a certain quality similar to hope, which made this gloomy environment give people a strange feeling of brightness. Understanding this, Luo Fan was even more interested in the world below. Even with Luo Fan's unimaginable speed compared to ordinary people, it took them a quarter of an hour to reach the end of the staircase. At the end of the staircase, it wasn't a pitch-black sealed space, but a world. It was a vast world that was unimaginably vast, as if it was hundreds of millions of miles wide. And the rules, laws, and even the grand Tao of this world compared to the eternal forest and even the great heaven primordial world. There was some kind of wonderful change. This change was so subtle that it couldn't be described with words. However, due to these changes, any living being that stepped into this world would feel that the power within their bodies had become extremely active. Between breaths, the efficiency of primordial qi transforming into one's own strength was at least several times higher than outside. It was obvious that this was a wonderful change for cultivators. This is the underground relic. Bai Yuan was so shocked by this scene that he couldn't help but exclaim. Feng Ling glanced at him and proudly scolded. Bumpkin, you're so shocked that you can't speak. There's an even more unbelievable scene waiting for you. Luo Fan had already seen the map and had some conjectures about the scene in front of him. Therefore, his degree of shock was not as great as Bai Yuan's. There was only a hint of admiration in his eyes, but his expression did not change much. The staircase that extended from above became more illusory the closer it got to the end. When it truly came into contact with the world, it had already transformed into nothingness, and only traces of its existence could be faintly seen. Those who entered would step on it and descend from above. Of course, this wasn't from the highest point in the world, but from a few dozen feet above the ground. And this few dozen feet, it was also a distance from where one could clearly see what the bottom looked like. The only thing that could be seen from this flight of stairs was a hazy shadow. It was impossible to see what the bottom looked like. The place where they landed was also a square, one that was very similar to the square at the entrance above. It was also engraved with countless symbols and lines, and it was still shining with all kinds of light, pushing some kind of power to condense at the foot of the stairs. There were also 2 pillars on both sides of the landing point. These 2 pillars were more than 10 times taller than the 2 above, and they emitted a sense of firmness and stability. An aura that could not be worn down by thousands of tribulations seemed to be holding up the sky above. The terrain of this world was extremely complicated, and there were countless strange buildings. These buildings were all extremely ancient and filled with an extremely strong aura of vicissitudes. Looking up into the distance, the entire world rose and fell. Almost all the terrain that could be found in a normal world could be found here. The buildings fused with the terrain in an extremely strange way. At first glance, it seemed as if the buildings were naturally formed in this world, as if they had existed since ancient times and appeared along with the creation of this world. Vaguely, there were powerful auras coming from these buildings. Some of these auras were filled with killing intent, some were filled with warmth, some were calling, and some were rejecting everything. These various auras made these buildings not seem like inanimate objects, but like countless strange creatures were hibernating here, ready to attack at any moment. This feeling was so obvious that no living being could ignore it. Most of these buildings have lost their functions, and only a very small portion can still display some of their functions. However, the power that they can display is already quite powerful. At the very least, for existences in the third or fourth stage of a mortal realm, there are many buildings that can help them advance in their cultivation and increase their power, Feng Ling introduced to Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan had seen all of his memories, it did not mean that Luo Fan had completely remembered all of his memories. For example, what he said was something that Luo Fan had seen and then forgotten. That was why he had the value of explaining. Luo Fan smiled and suddenly thought of something. He looked back at the stairs and said with a smile, "I didn't expect them to actually bring such a large group of people to chase up here. It seems like there are many conflicts between these forces." How shocking was Luo Fan's intelligence? Just by sensing the number of people coming down from above, he could instantly guess the intentions of the people chasing them. Although it's not very comfortable to be used as an excuse, forget it. Who asked you to come here first? Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. He took a few steps forward with Bai Yuan and Feng Ling and left the plaza. At the same time, he brought the two of them back into that mysterious state of invisibility. Previously, when walking up the stairs, Luo Fan did not continue to maintain that mysterious state of invisibility. It was not that this state required a lot of energy, but it was not necessary. At this moment, although he knew that the people chasing him were only using him as an excuse, he was still an excuse to enter the primordial ruins. However, he also understood that if he was seen by them, they would not be polite to him just because he was an excuse. They would definitely entangle with him. Although he was not afraid, he did not want to be so troublesome. Thus, he directly left using stealth. Just as Luo Fan and Bai Yuan and Feng Ling left the plaza and entered the state of invisibility, a bloody aura rolled down from the stairs and instantly rushed out of the exit. The entire plaza and the surrounding tens of thousands of feet of light seemed to be absorbed, and in the blink of an eye, it became dark. If one listened carefully, they could even hear wails. Angry curses were constantly coming from it. Then, the Bloodwood Monarch's figure directly rushed out of the stairs and let out a long roar to the sky. An unparalleled aura instantly spread across the world of the ruins, impacting the surrounding mountains, rivers, grass, and trees, and stirring up countless dust and sand, creating a shocking visual effect. While the Bloodwood Monarch was roaring to the sky behind him, one after another, living beings rushed out of the exit of the stairs and lined up behind the Bloodwood Monarch, also roaring. The Bloodwood Monarch gave a few orders. The thousands of cultivators instantly split into two groups. One group was led by the Bloodwood Monarch and directly went to a certain place in the ruins, while the other group began to set up various formations on the plaza and set up countless defenses, firmly guarding the plaza. Obviously, they were defending against the enemies that might rush down from the stairs. And looking at their skilled and tacit cooperation, it was obvious that they had done this more than once. Although the Bloodwood Monarch and the others rushed over from far away, they were at least existences of the immortal realm. This kind of existence, if they rushed at full speed, A distance of tens of thousands of miles would be a piece of cake for them. As for the stairs, although Luo Fan and the others were moving at a speed that ordinary people thought was extremely fast for them, it was neither too fast nor too slow. This kind of speed was naturally far inferior to the flying method of the Bloodwood Monarch and his subordinates, who did not care about anything and rushed forward at full speed. It was precisely because of this. Just now, Luo Fan and Fong Zizai had not been standing in this square for long before they arrived together. From the appearance of the Bloodwood Monarch, to his subordinates splitting into two teams, to his departure with one team, the whole process had happened very quickly. It was so fast that Luo Fan, who had not gone far, was still nearby and easily saw all this. At this time, Luo Fan was at the peak of the 7th stage, which was the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. And the invisibility technique he had lost was transferred from the invisibility technique in the untainted world. It was a kind of invisibility technique that was different from all the invisibility techniques in the Tianyuan Great World. It was precisely because of this that even though the Bloodwood Monarch was much more powerful than the existence of the ordinary 6th-stage celestial realm, he was completely unable to detect Luo Fan's invisibility technique, and had no idea that Luo Fan was invisible to the side and had seen all his actions. However, it was clear that the Bloodwood Monarch seemed to have more important things to do, and it seemed that he was not in the mood to find Luo Fan. In this case, perhaps if Luo Fan did not use the invisibility technique, the Bloodwood Monarch would not necessarily be able to detect him. How many creatures has he killed? How can his killing intent and evil chi be so strong? Under the protection of Luo Fan's invisibility technique, Bai Yuan was not discovered by the Bloodwood Monarch, but he could sense the Bloodwood Monarch's aura and the shocking evil chi and endless blood that the Bloodwood Monarch exuded. And this was almost the bloodiest and most murderous aura that he had felt in the course of his tens of millions of years of life. For a moment, fear rose in his heart, and he almost could not control himself. This is the Bloodwood Monarch. He is at least hundreds of millions of years old, and the power he has accumulated is enough to reach the 7th-stage celestial realm. It's just that because he has killed too many people, his beer has been obscured, and he can't understand the secrets of the 7th stage, so he has remained in the 6th stage. If he can clear his beer one day, reaching the 7th stage will be a matter of time. Even I can't seal him. Feng Ling's eyes were also filled with fear. Luo Fan had already seen Feng Ling's memories. Feng Ling had just opened his mouth when he already understood what he was going to say. However, although Feng Ling was powerful, as long as he did not become a Zenith Heaven Immortal, he would never be a match for him. Perhaps he was a huge trouble to all the 7th-stage Celestials in the great Tianyuan world, but to Luo Fan, who came from the primitive world and had higher requirements for the so-called 7th-stage Celestial realm, he would not cause much trouble. Perhaps it was exaggerated to say that he could crush him like an ant, but if he wanted to defeat him, he would not need to attack twice. Naturally, he did not need to explain this to Feng Ling and Bai Yuan. Therefore, he just smiled and said, "Let's go." With that, he turned around and led the two of them to a nearby building that seemed to be in good condition. The aura that this building emitted was a little warm and kind. From this, it should be a relatively harmless building. This was what Feng Ling had seen on the map. Whether it was on the surface or the map hidden in the depths of his memory, it showed this. However, the map did not show what the function of this building was. In fact, the two maps did not show what the functions of the buildings in the primordial ruins were. Although the map was quite detailed, it only showed whether these buildings were dangerous or not, and whether they could pass through smoothly. Because of this, Luo Fan felt the need to explore. The reason why Luo Fan entered the primordial ruins was to see what the original owner of Feng Ling was planning. However, this did not mean that he had no interest in the primordial ruins. On the contrary, he attached great importance to the primordial ruins. He wanted to obtain some cultivation enlightenment from the primordial ruins so that he could better create his own cultivation method in the great Tianyuan world. Enlightenment for cultivation obviously could not be obtained out of thin air. If he did not explore the entire primordial ruins, how could he obtain such enlightenment? The building was fused with a lake, and it looked like a crystal palace that existed in the middle of the lake. The lake was tens of thousands of feet wide, and the crystal palace-like building almost occupied the entire lake. Under the illumination of the light from above, specks of brilliance flickered on the surface, making it look very illusory and beautiful. Luo Fan quickly came to the side of the lake. With a glance, everything inside and outside of the lake was unreservedly analyzed in front of his eyes. In an instant, he discovered the construction method of the building and understood how to enter and exit it. However, he did not immediately enter the building. After all, he still did not know what the function of the building was. Although the aura emitted by the building was not very dangerous, that did not mean that there was no danger inside. Luo Fan carefully sensed. His perception continued to penetrate deeper into the lake, and he continued to analyze the building. After a while, a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "So that's how it is?" Then, he took a step forward and easily passed through the barrier of the lake with Ba Yuan and Feng Ling. They passed through the door of the building and entered the building. The building looked like a crystal palace, but the state of the lake inside was extremely strange. It was not in a liquid state, nor was it in a gaseous state, nor was it in a solid state. Instead, it was in a form of nothingness, as if it had merged with the void and turned into something similar to space. This form of existence made all creatures that stepped into it feel like they were in water. However, regardless of whether they had the ability to enter water without obstruction, they would not feel any stagnation or anything wrong. After feeling the mysterious feeling of being in this wonderful state of water, Luo Fan let out a long breath and thought to himself, "I didn't expect water to be in this state. It seems like entering the primordial ruins was the right choice." This form of water had already evolved the changes of water to a certain limit. To be able to maintain this form of water for countless years, the power of this building was rather terrifying. In reality, this building was not a magic treasure, nor was a magic tool. Instead, it was a mysterious existence between an artifact and a living being. This kind of existence did not have the spiritual consciousness of a living being, nor did it have the intelligence of a living being. However, it had all kinds of characteristics of a living being. It had all kinds of abilities and could continuously absorb all kinds of energy from the outside world to replace the various impurities in its body, thereby improving its quality. The function of this building was even more simple. It was to purify. It purified all existences that stayed in it. As impurities were continuously removed, they would gradually take on this water element that could melt into space. This kind of water element could change the physique of living beings, making it easier for living beings to control the water element and more freely. At the same time, if the cultivation method was related to water element, it would be twice the result with half the effort. However, this purification speed was relatively slow. According to Luo Fan's calculations, if this building remained in this state, it would take at least 100,000 years for an ordinary living being to sense a trace of water that could truly affect their cultivation and increase their control over water. Exchanging 100,000 years for a trace of water element was clearly not a rational choice. It was not a decision that a living being with a normal mind would make. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that, even though this building's function was so rare, not many cultivators chose this place to enjoy the pleasure of purification. At the very least, Luo Fan did not find too many traces of living beings in this building. To be continued. Chapter 785. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed at the air, taking out an artifact hidden in the depths of the Crystal Palace. Text first. This artifact was a strange magic treasure. Its level was not very high, only at the 3rd rank. This level, in the great desolate world, could only be considered a peak immortal treasure. The power it could display could only barely reach the level of a 4th rank immortal in the great heaven primal world. However, even if it was just a magic treasure like this, it was still quite precious. This magic treasure could not have been casually placed here. Luo Fan casually pointed at the magic treasure that was shaped like a bottle. Countless complex and mysterious lines appeared on the magic treasure. Each line was complex and mysterious to an unimaginable level. As each line shone, the sound of waves could be heard. It really is used as a place to refine magic treasures. Luo Fan praised in his heart. This magic treasure was clearly placed here by some cultivator to refine it, so that the water element would become denser and its power would become stronger. Stop! It hurts! An intermittent cry came from the bottle. Luo Fan was stunned. Then he realized that this was the voice of the magic treasure's treasure spirit. The reason for this was because this magic treasure was also born in the eternal forest. It was affected by the rules, laws, and grand Tao of the eternal forest, causing its spirit to transform and finally become this kind of treasure spirit. However, because the owner of this magic treasure did not refine it properly, he did not use the most suitable refining method to refine it. As a result, this treasure spirit was extremely imperfect and could not compare to Spirit Sealing. If Spirit Sealing had the intelligence and mind of a normal person, then the treasure spirit of this magic treasure only had the intelligence and mind of a 2 or 3-year-old baby. It could barely express its pain and make people stop, which was already very rare. What a pity. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. This magic treasure had the foundation to form a complete treasure spirit, as well as the various conditions to become a complete treasure spirit. It had been accumulating for a long time, but in the end, it only became a broken treasure spirit. This was indeed a waste. He did not continue to activate the magic treasure. He retracted his finger, and the countless lines on the magic treasure disappeared once again, absorbed into the magic treasure. When it was all done, a grateful sigh came from the magic treasure. Clearly, the simple mind of the treasure spirit was expressing its gratitude to Luo Fan. Luo Fan didn't care about this magic treasure. With a wave of his hand, another 6 or 7 magic treasures floated out from the depths of the Crystal Palace. In fact, these magic treasures were not just for display. On the contrary, there were countless layers of defensive formations around these treasures. Each of these formations was extremely shocking, and each of them was thousands of times larger than the total number of seals that led into the ruins. If it was an ordinary person, even if it was a rank 6 immortal realm existence, it was also impossible for him to break through these defensive formations and take out these magic treasures without making a sound. However, it was clear that Luo Fan was no ordinary person. With his experience, these defensive formations were no secret to him, and he was in existence at the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, which was the level of a rank 7 immortal of the heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, it was naturally easy to bypass these defensive formations and take out these magic treasures. Each of these magic treasures was related to water. Most of them looked like water containers. However, every magic treasure was only at the 3rd rank, and the strongest magic treasure was only barely at the 4th rank. Obviously, the creatures who placed these magic treasures in this crystal palace should be at the same level. They should be creatures of the same level. It was very likely that they were the rulers of the surrounding great powers. The power of these magic treasures was quite limited, but they had all been placed in this crystal palace for tens of thousands of years. Every magic treasure contained a considerable amount of water element. The power of their bodies was much stronger than when they had just been placed in this crystal palace. After sensing it slightly, Luo Fan sighed to himself. All of these treasures possess the foundation and conditions to become complete treasure spirits, possessing complete intelligence and mind. However, due to the fact that their owners were unable to refine them properly, they could only barely be said to possess treasure spirits. The treasure spirit with the most intelligence and mind was only comparable to a 4 or 5-year-old child. There was even one that had barely broken away from its spirit and was not much different from a newborn baby. How could Luo Fan not feel that it was a pity? If these magic treasures were slightly refined, their power would at most increase by 100 times. However, their use would increase by at least 10,000 times. With a thought, Luo Fan did not stand on ceremony. He casually covered these magic treasures and put them all into his universe in his sleeve. He came to the primordial ruins to see things that he had never seen before, so that he could receive some inspiration and improve his cultivation. However, there were good things in front of him. He would not be courteous with anyone. Although he did not think much of the power of these magic treasures, they were still mysterious treasures with treasure spirits. It was quite a pity to waste them. Why does Master like these pieces of trash? These things are completely useless. Just me alone is enough to make up for countless of them. Feng Ling muttered disdainfully as she watched from the side. After all, he was only the treasure spirit of a magic treasure. He did not feel the intimacy of a real living creature, nor did he feel the loneliness of not having one of his own kind in the world. To him, all other treasures were his competitors. In this world, there was only one treasure like this, and that was the most perfect. Because of this mentality, he did not sympathize with these magic treasures, even though they were his kind. He even begged Luo Fan to help them gain intelligence. Luo Fan glanced at him and did not say anything. He only said, "There's nothing good here. Let's go." With that, he took a step forward and brought Ba Yuan and Feng Ling out of the Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace had accumulated power for hundreds of millions of years. Its power was quite terrifying. Even a sixth-stage immortal could not compare to it. If they accidentally triggered an attack from the internal mechanism of the Crystal Palace, the power accumulated over hundreds of millions of years would instantly transform into destructive power. It would directly wipe out everything that triggered the mechanism. Therefore, although Luo Fan walked uneasily, he felt that the Crystal Palace did not have much power. Luo Fan, Ba Yuan, and the others did not stay in the Crystal Palace for too long. However, during this period of time, an extremely shocking battle had already erupted in the square at the entrance of this world. Countless powerful shockwaves burst out from the square, and all sorts of mysterious lights and shadows flashed. The shockwaves continuously spread in all directions from that location. Waves of killing intent, screams, and screams filled the air. The sounds of explosions soared into the sky, and a black mist continuously spread out. Although the surrounding forces couldn't compare to the Bloodwood King in terms of individual strength, their combined strength was much stronger than the Bloodwood King's. It was just that they hadn't fully cooperated before, which was why the Bloodwood King had been so arrogant. This time, the Bloodwood King had directly broken the rules, which was akin to slapping them in the face. This was simply destroying the root of their territory. How could they retreat again? Finally, they fully joined forces and brought their subordinates to follow the Bloodwood King into the primordial ruins. They wanted to teach the Bloodwood King a lesson. After all, they also had a backer. The reason why they had retreated before when facing the Bloodwood King was not because they were afraid of him, but because they felt that it was unnecessary. Although the Bloodwood King's subordinates had taken the initiative to lay down layers of defenses in the square, their overall strength was inferior to the combined strength of the other forces. Therefore, they were gradually suppressed. The layers of defenses gradually collapsed, and more casualties appeared. The living beings on both sides of the battle were at least immortal realm existences. They fought like this. The damage they caused to the surrounding environment was extremely shocking. If it was in a normal world, this kind of immortal realm battle would have caused many casualties, and the world within tens of thousands of miles would have been destroyed. But in this strange world of the primordial ruins, after the power they emitted collapsed, it did not have much impact on the surroundings and directly dissipated into the world. Hence, even though their battle was so intense and resulted in so many deaths and injuries, the plaza was not damaged at all. At most, a lot of the dust around the square was swept up, illustrating how intense the battle was. When Luo Fan came out of the Crystal Palace, it just happened that the layers of defenses of the Bloodwood King's subordinates collapsed. When the defenses collapsed, the Bloodwood King's subordinates saw that the situation was hopeless, and with a whistling sound, they used their own methods to quickly flee in different directions. Some burrowed into the ground. Some merged into the void, and some directly took advantage of the dust to escape into the distance. Judging from their proficiency, it was obvious that they had a lot of experience in this kind of escape method. They must have tried it many times. After the Bloodwood King's subordinates left, 6 immortal realm existences rushed out of the stairs. In the untainted world, the Stage 6 immortal realm existences were already primordial unity golden immortals. Although they could not compare to Luo Fan, they were still extremely powerful existences. As soon as these Stage 6 immortals appeared in the world, they emitted a billowing aura that spread in all directions, stirring the clouds above and stirring the surrounding primordial chi. In an instant, all the fluctuations caused by the battle were completely suppressed. The Bloodwood King didn't leave behind any tricks to trap us? How is that possible? A Stage 6 immortal, who was as thin as a monkey, muttered. These 6 people were of different shapes and sizes, but they all had the appearance of Khanate Taoism bodies that belonged to the Great Tianyuan world. However, some were dozens of feet tall, while others were only a few feet tall. The person who spoke was the skinniest among them, a rank 6 immortal who was only a meter tall. Looks like he left in a hurry. If we had known this would happen, we would have rushed out and crushed them. Now we have wasted so much time. A blue being who was around 3 meters tall said with a frown. The faint sound of waves could be heard echoing within his body. Then what are we waiting for? I think the Bloodwood King must have gone there. That's the only place he would be in such a hurry. A chubby middle-aged man who was 6 feet wide, but only 6 feet tall, with wood patterns all over his body, said in a very dissatisfied manner. I think I know where it is. Calculating the time, that thing would mature in a few days. It seems that the Bloodwood monarch must have left some means to monitor the ruins. Even if that being didn't enter the ruins today, he'll definitely find some other excuse to enter. The only beautiful woman among the 6 said with a frown. Then let's go. Of the remaining 2, one was extremely tall, about 4 zhang tall. There was a faint white light around him, and a sharp aura spread out in all directions. He looked like a normal middle-aged man, but his eyes seemed to have countless concentric circles. His eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. The person who spoke was the middle-aged man who looked like a normal person. The others clearly trusted him, so they didn't say anything. They directly ordered their subordinates to quickly fly in the direction that the Bloodwood monarch had left. In the blink of an eye, they had disappeared into the depths of the ruins. These changes, Luo Fan didn't listen seriously, but he was seriously calculating. However, how could he not sense that they were flying in such a direct and arrogant manner? They seemed to be heading towards a dangerous place marked on the map. Could there be some secret there? Luo Fan thought to himself. However, this was just a thought. Could there be something good in the primordial ruins? If he wanted to participate in everything, he wouldn't need to do anything else. Just this matter alone would be enough to keep him busy. Thus, after this thought flashed through his mind, he didn't care about them anymore. He took Bai Yuan and Feng Ling to the next destination. After the subordinates of the 6-stage immortals cleaned up the battlefield, they didn't disperse. Instead, they set up camp in the plaza and joined together, setting up layer after layer of defensive formations in the plaza. But this time, it wasn't aimed at the staircase from above, but the entire world of the ruins and the outside world, completely guarding the square and the staircase. Obviously, they were doing what the Bloodwood monarch subordinates had done before. They guarded the path that the Bloodwood monarch subordinates had to pass through. The Bloodwood monarch subordinates obviously couldn't stay in the ruins forever. They had to leave. The only way out of the ruins was the stairs behind them. Therefore, as long as they guarded the stairs, it would be equivalent to grabbing the Bloodwood monarch's throat. No matter what the Bloodwood monarch subordinates were planning, things wouldn't go out of control. Luo Fan walked. He didn't move too fast or too slowly. He just walked from one building to another unhurriedly. The primordial ruins were extremely vast. Even the map that was used as a cover on the surface had an area of tens of thousands of miles that had already been explored. The area hidden inside was more than 10 times larger than this. And this was obviously only a very, very small part of the entire relic. The number of buildings in such a vast primordial ruin had naturally reached a rather shocking level. The buildings that could make Luo Fan interested in exploring were naturally not few. Therefore, Luo Fan didn't have to worry about being bored. He leisurely visited one building after another along the way. Most of the buildings that Luo Fan visited were intact, but some of the ruins attracted his attention because of some special aura. He changed his route and went there for some time. The entire primordial ruins was an extremely mysterious world, but it was different from the normal world outside. The entire world seemed boundless. It was as if one could see the ends of the world with a glance no matter where they stood. It was as if the entire world was unobstructed, waiting for living beings to explore it. But in reality, only by personally walking between the world and the depths of the world would one discover the layers of barriers that existed between the heaven and the earth. These barriers seemed to be invisible and intangible, but they divided heaven and earth into layers. Each layer of the world had different qualities compared to the others. These qualities were all different. Just like the countless buildings in this world, they had all sorts of different uses. Some are only harmful to living beings, while others had endless benefits. Some of the world's qualities could raise a living being's cultivation by a level the moment they stepped inside. Some could even kill 4th or 5th stage immortals instantly. There was no pattern to the changes in the qualities of these layers. Even the shapes of these layers didn't have any pattern to them. It didn't say what kind of qualities one layer had and what kind of qualities the next layer would have. Even where the boundaries of each layer were, only by personally experiencing it could one truly know that this was a different layer. So this was how the world's qualities of this layer looked like. However, although there was no specific quality, there was a general pattern to the changes. That was, the deeper one went into the world, the more intense the changes would be, and the more chaotic the shape of the levels would be, and the more difficult it would be to guess. From the looks of it, it was as if the incomparably orderly existence had been directly twisted from the center, completely disrupted, and then gradually radiated to the surroundings, causing the surroundings to also be twisted and disrupted, causing the surrounding laws to also be disrupted. This caused the violent changes in the center, while the outside world gradually calmed down. To be continued, Chapter 786. Luo Fan led Ba Yuan and Feng Ling all the way forward, exploring deeper and deeper into the building. Text first appeared. The direction he walked in was the route on the map, hidden inside the spirit sealing realm. He walked directly to the deepest part of the map, the location marked by the previous owner of the spirit sealing realm. However, the number of buildings he passed by along the way was extremely high, allowing him to gradually familiarize himself with the ruins as he moved forward. He felt that the ruins were an eye-opener for him. Every building in this world of ruins had an extremely subtle connection with other buildings. This connection allowed these buildings to form an extremely mysterious whole with the heaven and earth. Any creature that wanted to destroy these buildings would be equivalent to going against the entire world of the ruins, which might trigger a violent reaction from the entire world. However, these buildings also possessed all sorts of mysterious functions. They were either extremely beneficial to cultivators or mercilessly slaughtered them. These functions were generally the strengthening of a certain heaven and earth level, or it could be said that the formation of these heaven and earth levels was due to the various functions of these buildings. Luo Fan walked all the way with a calm expression on his face. The changes in the levels of heaven and earth were similar to the functions of the buildings. The map obtained from Feng Ling did not directly mark them, but used a one-size-fits-all method to directly mark which levels of heaven and earth were harmful to living beings. As for the benefits, apart from the harmful ones, they were probably all beneficial. Because of this, although he roughly knew whether each heaven and earth level was harmful or harmless, every time he entered a new heaven and earth level, Luo Fan was still very curious. He carefully sensed the mysteries of each heaven and earth level and enjoyed the different feelings brought to him by each heaven and earth level. Of course, to him, this was just a feeling of enjoyment. But to Ba Yuan, for Ba Yuan, Every time he entered a new heaven and earth level, it was equivalent to an adventure between life and death. After all, he didn't know whether the new heaven and earth level they were about to enter was marked as dangerous or safe in the map obtained by Luo Fan. Even if it was a safe place, it might not necessarily be safe for him, let alone a place that was marked as dangerous. He was only a rank 3 immortal. Although his cultivation had reached the peak of the third order, it was still too late. However, he was still only a third stage immortal. Compared to the cultivators who had explored the primordial ruins and created these maps, his cultivation was still far too weak. Places that were safe to those who had explored the ruins and created the maps could be fatal to him. What he had experienced along the way had proven his worries. Over the course of several days, he had encountered many things that had greatly benefited the heart flame within him. It might have become lively, condensed, pure, or greatly strengthened. However, he had encountered situations that caused his body to suffer great damage, caused his heart flame to undergo changes that he did not need, and caused him to expend a great amount of effort to eliminate the changes. He had also encountered situations that caused him to encounter dozens of times. However, although Luo Fan did not care much about Ba Yuan, he would not purposely kill him. Therefore, he would occasionally pay attention to Ba Yuan. When he felt that these levels of heaven and earth were fatal to Ba Yuan, he would either let Ba Yuan wait outside or give him some protection so that he wouldn't die because of the qualitative change of heaven and earth. This was the reason why he had been able to reach this point safely. During the journey, Luo Fan did not pay attention to where the Bloodwood King and the others were, nor did he pay attention to how they were fighting with each other. But along the way, he could sense that they had been fighting with each other. Powerful auras were constantly being emitted from a certain location in the ruins. Shocking fluctuations constantly swept across the entire ruins. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly frowned. He found that the auras of the Bloodwood King and the others had suddenly shifted to a location that was about half a day away from where he was. This place had already exceeded the range recorded on the map that Spirit Sealing had been using as a cover. However, it was still far from the range recorded on the map. It seems that these forces have a deeper understanding of the primordial ruins than other cultivators, Luo Fan thought to himself. However, his speed did not accelerate or slow down because of these changes. The further he went, the more intense the changes in heaven and earth became. What was beneficial to living beings became more beneficial, and what was harmful became more harmful. It was like the level of heaven and earth in front of Luo Fan that was one step away from him, but it still exuded an extremely sharp killing intent. This killing intent was invisible and intangible, and it did not have the deep luster of ordinary killing intent. At first glance, there was no difference between this place and this place at all. Only his outstanding perception could sense how rich the killing intent was. For Luo Fan, this kind of evil chi only made him feel a little pressured. If he used some special method, he could even use it to temper his Tao law and magic tools. But for Ba Yuan, as soon as he stepped into it, the killing intent would instantly invade his soul and completely erode his will. From then on, he would become a monster that only knew how to kill and not think. He looked up and saw countless corpses lying in the depths of the level of heaven and earth. Even though only bones were left, their bodies were covered in countless wounds. On the heaven and earth level, there was a tall tower. The pagoda had 16 levels and covered an area of tens of thousands of feet. The entire pagoda was dark red in color, as if it had been forged from solidified blood. Although the baleful aura didn't affect the tower, anyone who saw it would feel as though the entire world had turned into a sea of blood. Vaguely, there were even all sorts of terrifying howls and howls coming from the tower, as if something was being suppressed within it. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and he said, "You two stay here." As he spoke, he stepped into the heaven and earth level. In an instant, it was as if there were billions of sharp blades attacking him from all directions, drilling into every acupoint in his body. They wanted to completely open up all the acupoints in his body, and from there, rush into his body and directly attack his soul. However, Luo Fan was only at the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. In the great Tianyuan heaven and earth, he was only at the entry stage of the upper 3 levels of the celestial realm. But his body was directly pushed forward from the pneuma of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth, and finally deduced the body shape of the creator of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth. This kind of body shape could be said to be the most original form of the great Tianyuan heaven and earth. The most authentic born Taoism aptitude. It could be said to be perfect to the extreme without the slightest flaw. With this kind of body, plus his current strength, how could it be possible for the baleful aura to invade it? For a moment, crisp sounds came from Luo Fan's body. The baleful aura kept colliding, but it only smashed itself into pieces and kept dissipating. It's really quite strong. For those who haven't reached the upper 3 levels of the celestial realm, this is a place of almost certain death. No wonder the map marked this place as an extremely dangerous place, Luo Fan thought. Amid the countless crisp sounds of explosions, he kept moving forward. In just a few steps, he had already reached the front of the 16-story tower. After a rough count, there were tens of thousands of corpses lying on the ground. These corpses were placed in various postures. Some were intertwined, as if they were still fighting before they died. Some were lying on the walls of the tower, as if they were trying to climb up. Some were even stretching their limbs towards the sky, as if they were afraid of the heavens. There were all kinds of dead bodies. It was impossible to guess what had happened to these creatures before they died to cause them to be in such a state. Luo Fan sighed to himself. As he walked, he thought about what kind of situation could cause such a state of death. Along the way, there were not many corpses that could really tell the cause of death, but he could tell that these corpses had been lying there for an extremely long time. He could also roughly guess what level of cultivation these corpses had when they were alive. Most of these corpses were in the 4th or 5th stage, but there were also many in the 6th stage. He even saw a corpse sitting cross-legged at the bottom of the tower. It looked more serene than the other corpses, and it did not turn into white bones. Instead, it still had the appearance of a shriveled human. It was at least in the 7th stage. The gate of the tower was tightly shut. Although there were tens of thousands of corpses around, there was not a single corpse within a short distance of the gate of the tower. It was as if there was some kind of strange power that repelled other creatures, so that the corpses did not dare to come close. Luo Fan came to the gate without hesitation. As soon as he stood there, he understood why these corpses did not dare to come close to the gate of the tower. The ominous aura emitted from the gate of the tower was at least 100 times stronger than the ominous aura in other places. The ominous aura was so strong that it had even distorted the void. It made the words on the gate of the tower difficult to read. Such a dense, ominous aura instantly made Luo Fan's body slightly stagnate. He even felt some faint stabbing pain from the acupoints all over his body. Fortunately, although the ominous aura was strong, it did not exceed his limit. Therefore, even though he felt it, he was not really hurt. His body trembled slightly, and the ominous aura was instantly dispersed. Roar! Faintly, there was an endless bestial roar coming from behind the gate. This roar contained boundless anger, boundless killing intent, boundless anticipation, and even more boundless excitement. It was as if it had sensed that a living being was approaching this location. Luo Fan frowned and sensed this roar. He found out that the owner of this roar was at least in the 7th stage. At that moment, he was wondering whether or not he should push open the gate and enter. However, this doubt only flashed for a moment before disappearing. Although the existence of the 7th stage was similar to his current cultivation realm, if he wanted to win, it would not be difficult. He came to the ancient ruins to increase his knowledge. If he flaunted his prowess when he saw a living being weaker than him, and retreated when he saw a living being stronger than him, then even if he increased his knowledge, he would only be able to bully the kind and fear the evil. How could he achieve real results? Perhaps the reason why I haven't been able to comprehend the key and create a cultivation technique is related to the fact that I rarely encounter a true powerhouse. Luo Fan thought to himself and chuckled, feeling that his mind had become a little clearer. With a wave of his hand, an incomparably powerful force blasted against the door. There was a loud rumble. The gate seemed to be supported by the power of heaven and earth. It began to slowly open, as if countless mountains were moving. At that moment, a giant beast roared and pounced towards Luo Fan. The aura of this giant beast was extremely shocking. Just the aura it emitted was enough to make one tremble. Just the aura it emitted was enough to twist the space around it and condense the ominous aura into one form after another. It did not look like a giant beast was pouncing towards Luo Fan, but an army of beasts was attacking Luo Fan. Luo Fan glanced around. He had already seen the giant beast's body. This giant beast was shaped like a giant leopard. It had 2 long fangs, and its body was blood red. Its eyes shone with a bloody light. Any living creature that was shown by this light would feel like they were in a sea of blood. This giant leopard was 10 feet tall. Even the gate of the tower seemed a little small for it. However, size was never a limit for cultivators. Even though the gate was 10 feet tall, this giant leopard was not restricted at all. Not only could it pass through the gate to attack Luo Fan, but could also perform countless maneuvers inside the gate. It was in accordance with the rules of the world. The rules were the Great Tao, and it could unleash destructive power that could destroy all living creatures in front of it. This giant leopard was the owner of the roar that Luo Fan had heard before. This was a strange beast of the great heaven primordial world. It could be said to be a ferocious beast, a divine beast. Its name was very arrogant. It was called Devouring Immortals. In a world ruled by immortal realm cultivators, it could have a sinister name like Devouring Immortals. It was enough to show how special and powerful this giant hand was. This was the truth. This giant beast was born with the strength of a rank 1 immortal realm cultivator. Once they were born, they would be able to devour stage 1 immortals. Moreover, they would only devour stage 1 immortals. Once it reached adulthood, it would be a rank 4 immortal. At that time, even rank 4 immortals would just be delicious food to it. It was because of this characteristic that it had the name Devouring Immortals. This kind of strange beast was too arrogant and terrifying. It was not common even in the great heaven primordial world. Unless it was a barren land in the outer region, this kind of strange beast would have been wiped out in areas where powerful cultivators lived. At this moment, the one that appeared in front of Luo Fan was a Devouring Immortals. Moreover, it was not a rank 4 immortal realm Devouring Immortals that had just reached adulthood. Instead, it was a rank 7 immortal realm Devouring Immortals that had grown to its peak. This kind of Devouring Immortals needed to devour at least hundreds of thousands of rank 4 immortals and spend billions of years to grow to its current level. After seeing the Devouring Immortals clearly and guessing how long it had existed and how many immortals it had devoured, Luo Fan finally understood where the terrifying killing intent of this world came from. At the same time, he also knew why the corpses around the tower had died here. This killing intent was clearly the killing intent of the Devouring Immortals. The Devouring Immortals was a living creature that could only survive and grow by devouring immortals. Relatively speaking, it could be said to be the natural enemy of immortals. It was an existence that all immortals in the great heaven primordial world had to be wary of or even fearful of. In this world, the killing intent on its body had an unimaginable effect on immortals, not to mention its strength. If other killing intents needed 100% to have an effect on immortals, then the killing intent of the Devouring Immortals could probably achieve the same effect with just 1%. Under such circumstances, the killing intent produced by the sight of tens of thousands of immortals would naturally be quite fatal to those who accidentally intruded into this world and sensed the killing intent on its body. The surrounding corpses were obviously the result of the mental collapse of those ancestors under the oppression of the killing intent, turning them into monsters that only knew how to kill and eventually died in battle. Luo Fan's thoughts flashed extremely quickly. Although there were a lot of things going on, when he sorted out these thoughts, the figure of the Devouring Immortals was still in midair, still fiercely pouncing towards him. The claws that had the power to distort the void were still 3 feet away from his body. The imposing manner and killing intent of the devouring immortals were strong to an unimaginable extent, and even had an unparalleled deterrent effect on immortal realm living creatures. However, this was nothing to Luo Fan. With just a slight struggle, he broke free from the locking of the imposing manner and killing intent. His figure flashed, and his right hand clenched into a fist, drawing a trajectory that coincided with the laws of heaven and earth, and blasted towards the nose of the devouring immortals. The devouring immortals had devoured tens of thousands of immortals, and it had taken it hundreds of millions of years to grow to its current strength. It had long possessed extraordinary wisdom. Seeing that Luo Fan could easily break free from its imposing manner and killing intent, it could not help but be taken aback, and a look of disbelief flashed in its eyes. However, its combat ability was rather terrifying after all. Although it felt inconceivable, its body naturally moved. With a slight tremble, its body seemed to have not changed at first glance. But in reality, it had already moved tens of thousands of times, becoming ethereal and unpredictable. It was difficult for any power to lock onto it. This movement already contained infinite martial arts principles, enough to evolve thousands of cultivation methods that could increase a cultivator's fighting ability by hundreds or thousands of times. However, this kind of change was still too crude for Luo Fan, who had single-handedly created the entire cultivation system in the untainted world. Without any change, his right hand passed through all the dodging and blocking of the devouring immortals and blasted its nose. To be continued. Chapter 787. Boom! A loud sound rang out. Text first. At this moment, the celestial devourer exotic beast seemed to be hit by the whole world. It felt an indescribable force hitting its nose. Then it felt an unimaginable pain in its nose. Blood gushed out, and its whole body was like a piece of paper. It flew backward at a speed 10 times faster than before and crashed into the tower again. God Luo Fan, who had blasted the immortal devouring beast back into the tower, was slightly moved. He praised inwardly. It is indeed powerful. Even its fragile nose is so powerful. My punch should have been enough to turn a 7-stage immortal's body into dust. But when I hit this thing, it only bled a little from its nose. As he exclaimed in admiration, his figure had already walked into the tower. From the outside, the tower looked pitch black, but once inside, one would find that it was very spacious and bright. This was the first floor of the tower with an area of about hundreds of thousands of feet, but it was much wider than it looked from the outside. Obviously, some mysterious space-time technique was contained in it. The evil chi in the tower was more than 100 times stronger than the outside. If Luo Fan hadn't been prepared, he would have been at a disadvantage when he first entered. At this moment, the celestial devourer exotic beast was lying under the opposite wall with its belly facing the sky. There was a huge mark of the celestial devourer on the wall. Obviously, Luo Fan's punch had blasted it into the wall, leaving a huge mark on the wall. Then, before Luo Fan stepped into the tower, the celestial devourer exotic beast slowly slid down to its current position. Heavy breathing could be heard from the celestial devourer exotic beast, and a pool of blood was constantly expanding under its body. The incomparably strong smell of blood was getting stronger and stronger in the endless evil chi. Obviously, this display indicated that even though the divine devourer beast was blasted into an extremely sorry state by Luo Fan's strike, it didn't die. It just couldn't get up for a while. Luo Fan stepped forward, and in a few steps, he had already crossed a distance of dozens of feet. He came to the side of that line of sight. Lowering his head, he saw a look of disbelief on the sinister face of the devouring celestial. His eyes were filled with incomparable daze. He knew what he was thinking at this moment. You're a rare exotic beast. It would be a pity to give up on it. Luo Fan looked at the exotic beast and said. As he spoke, he raised his hand and covered the strange beast. In an instant, billions of specks of light gushed out from his hand and weaved into a mysterious and unpredictable pattern in the void. It guided the infinite rules, laws, and even the great Tao toward the immortal devouring beast below. The immortal devouring mutated beast's heart was filled with trepidation. An indescribable sense of danger rose from his heart. This sense of danger was so strong that it was 100 times more dangerous than the most dangerous situation it had ever sensed in its life. In this kind of intense, in the face of such shocking danger, he quickly recovered from the intense pain and disbelief. He gathered all the devouring power in his body. In an instant, it was as if billions of bombs had exploded in his body. His entire body erupted with boundless power. Boundless light rushed out from his body, and the surrounding laws were under this power. The surrounding rules and laws were instantly distorted under this light. In the blink of an eye, the distance between it and the mysterious pattern formed by Luo Fan specks of light was widened by thousands of feet, and it was still widening at a faster and faster speed. The distance between them was about to reach a state that could be seen but not reached. However, although his reaction speed was extremely fast, it was still too slow compared to Luo Fan's movements. In just an instant, the mysterious and complicated pattern directly crossed thousands of feet, as if there was no time interval, and directly came to the body of the celestial devourer. With a sudden tremble, it sank and completely entered the body of the celestial devourer. In an instant, the celestial devourer only felt indescribable pain from the point of contact between the pattern and its body, and it almost broke its mind, causing the wisdom that it had accumulated over hundreds of millions of years to disappear. How could it endure this kind of shocking pain? In an instant, it opened its mouth and let out earth-shattering screams. These screams were so intense and horrifying that anyone who heard them would feel incomparable pain. Any living being that heard it would feel an incomparable pain. If one's mind wasn't firm enough, they might even be unable to control themselves and commit suicide because of the screams. The pain contained in the screams was so powerful that it had an unbelievable infectious power. Of course, this was nothing to Luo Fan. With a thought from Luo Fan, the mysterious pattern formed by the specks of light in his hand changed shape in an instant. In the blink of an eye, millions of forms were derived and directly entered into various parts of the body of the celestial devourer, penetrating deep into the celestial devourer's origin. With a loud bang, the entire celestial devourer turned into a ball of mysterious light, accompanied by an extremely shrill and desperate howl. As it turned into the mysterious light, the celestial devourer inside the entire tower and the surrounding endless evil chi seemed to be pulled by a black hole and frantically gathered towards the mysterious light. In a trance, it seemed like a tornado suddenly appeared around a mysterious light out of nowhere. This process lasted for several quarters of an hour. After this extremely terrifying suction force continued for several minutes. Even though the density of the malevolent aura around the tower was beyond imagination, not a single drop of it was able to escape. It was completely absorbed by the mysterious light. The entire tower and the surrounding evil chi disappeared completely. The endless evil chi that surrounded this level of heaven and earth finally disappeared completely after raging for hundreds of millions of years. With these changes, there were suddenly countless cracking sound around the tower. The countless corpses that had been corroded by the evil chi for countless years without being damaged turned into countless pieces after the evil chi disappeared, unable to withstand the difference. In just a few breaths, the many corpses turned into powder. Only a few corpses that were relatively powerful when they were alive remained intact, maintaining their complete forms in the endless powder. However, even though their forms were still intact, their postures also changed due to the sudden changes. Almost none of them could maintain their original postures. One of the corpses that was originally squatting suddenly jumped up as if it had broken free from some indescribable pressure. It only fell down after flying hundreds of feet into the air. In the end, it was buried in the thick bone powder. Although there were only tens of thousands of corpses around, not all of them had the appearance of born Taoism aptitude, and their sizes were not as big as ordinary people's. As a result, The tens of thousands of corpses produced an extremely large amount of powder. When the powder spread out, it even drowned the first floor of the tower. However, there was some mysterious power in the tower that blocked the door. As a result, although the first floor of the tower was almost drowned, no powder entered the tower through the door. Ba Yuan and Feng Ling, one man and one treasure, had been waiting for Luo Fan at the boundary between heaven and earth. The moment Luo Fan entered the tower, everything happened too quickly. His body was slightly distorted by the extremely strong evil qi, so they only saw something in the tower pouncing at him. However, he sent it flying back at an even faster speed. They could not see what was pouncing at Luo Fan, nor did they know how unbelievable it was for Luo Fan to send it flying back so easily. However, they only felt that it was extremely normal. They even wanted to try and follow Luo Fan into the tower to see what was going on inside. Fortunately, they were still rational. They knew that Luo Fan had ordered them to wait here, which meant that they could not resist the heaven and earth level in front of them. However, they did not recklessly step into it. After waiting for a few minutes, the corpses around the tower began to change. What happened in front of them made Bai Yuan's hair stand on end. He almost could not help but step back. In an instant, countless corpses around the tower suddenly seemed to come to life. Suddenly, countless corpses twisted. Some even stood up, jumped up, and finally disintegrated in mid-air, turning into powder that poured down. There was a huge amount of bone powder. Like a surging wave, it surged out from the tower in all directions, directly breaking through the barrier between heaven and earth. It flooded towards Bai Yuan, and Feng Ling was fine. He was the treasure spirit of a magic treasure, so he did not have as many fears as ordinary creatures. Although he was shocked, he did not lose his judgment. He jumped up as the bone powder flooded over. He floated in midair and watched the bone powder rush past his feet. Compared to Feng Ling, Bai Yuan did not have this kind of ability. He was a normal creature, but he could still be affected by emotions. Due to the sudden and strange scene, he couldn't control his body for a moment. He barely managed to react by jumping a step back, but he was completely drowned in the bone powder. Although the bone powder seemed to be very fragile, it seemed that it would collapse with the wind. In fact, these corpses were at least existences in the 4th or 5th order immortal realm when they were alive. In the entire Tianyuan Great World, even in the Eternal Forest, such powerful existences were not considered powerful. They could only be considered average. However, in the Untainted Land, there were powerful existences in the 3 realms of primordial unity. Compared to the 3 realms of Earth Immortals, or even the existences in the Golden Immortal Realm, they were tens of thousands of times more powerful. Naturally, any one of these corpses was tens of thousands of times more powerful than Bai Yuan when they were alive. Although these corpses had been dead for many years and their power had almost dissipated, their foundation was still there. Moreover, there was a huge number of them. Under such circumstances, almost every bit of bone powder was equivalent to a mountain to Bai Yuan. The countless bones and powder rushed towards him like countless mountains rushing towards him. That feeling was so intense that he could not help but spit out a large mouthful of blood. His whole body was like a broken cloth bag, rushing towards the back along with the bone powder. It was as if he had also become a part of the bone powder, becoming a grain of powder. If it was in the past, Bai Yuan might have fainted at this moment. The bone powder would directly break through his body and turn him into powder. However, Bai Yuan was different from before. His willpower was much higher than before, and his realm had risen to the peak of the 3rd order immortal realm. He had also memorized countless things that he could not understand, such as the various mysteries of cultivation that Luo Fan and the Beak Coffin had mentioned. Under such circumstances, he managed to maintain a little clarity in his mind. Amidst the boundless pain and pressure, the heart fire that was coiled in his heart was instantly stimulated. This heart fire instantly soared by who knows how many times, directly enveloping his entire body. It made him seem as if he had become a man of fire. After all, it was impossible for there to be an endless amount of bone powder. Thus, the the distance that the bone powder surged along with the 8 yuan was naturally not too far. After surging for several tens of feet, the bone powder stopped. Ba Yuan also escaped from the countless powerful impacts of the bone powder. He stopped under the bone powder, quietly lying on the ground. The bone powder was really too heavy for him. Even if he stopped there, he still felt that his body was enduring some kind of unimaginable pressure, as if there were countless mountains pressing down on him. This kind of heavy pressure finally stimulated the blood in his heart. The nature of the heart fire instantly changed along with the blood in his heart. It madly burned the surrounding powder. The powder was at least in the 4th or 5th order immortal realm. Although they had died for so many years and their power had almost dissipated, there was still a vast amount of power in them compared to Ba Yuan. Being burned by his heart fire, it started to gradually melt, and the power within it started to gradually release. Feeling the change in the powder, Ba Yuan instantly felt an indescribable ecstasy. He no longer held back. The heart fire crazily soared, trying its best to envelop more and more bone powder, igniting more and more of the bone powder. The power that was released continuously turned into fuel for his heart fire, making his heart fire more and more vigorous, more and more intense. What Ba Yuan was currently cultivating was this heart fire. This fire of the heart was his root power. It was the root of his cultivation realm. The vigorous heart fire, the increase of the heart fire, represented that his power was vigorous, and his power was increasing. And after going through the numerous opportunities in the past, what Ba Yuan lacked was, it was no longer the realm, but the power. Under this kind of situation, the increase in power was like having a pillow when he was sleepy. How could he not be happy? How could he not be excited? At that moment, Ba Yuan only felt that his power was constantly rising, and the surrounding pressure on his body also became smaller and weaker. In a trance, he found that he could already stand up and no longer had to lie on the ground under the endless powder like before. After an unknown amount of time, he found that his power had increased by several times, and the surrounding pressure had also decreased by several times. Floating was no longer a difficult thing for him, so his body slowly floated up. This kind of change was felt by him, but in the eyes of Feng Ling, who was outside, it was extremely shocking. He floated in the air, and when the surging bone powder calmed down, he found that Ba Yuan had disappeared without a trace. For a moment, he did not know what kind of disaster this was for Ba Yuan. After all, he was a rank 6 magic treasure, and the bone powder was not much different from real powder to him. Thus, he could only secretly laugh at Ba Yuan's slow reaction, which was really embarrassing. When Ba Yuan's muffled groan entered his ears, he then remembered that Ba Yuan was actually so weak. The bone powder that he treated as ordinary powder was like a mountain to him. Being submerged by this powder was not much different from being submerged by a mountain. He could not help but be shocked, and a little worry and panic arose in his heart. Although he was a treasure spirit and did not have true fear, this did not mean that he was really fearless. Since he had spiritual sense and wisdom, he naturally could think and naturally would have various corresponding thoughts due to various encounters. Therefore, the expression he showed was similar to fear. This was similar to some people. Some people who were born indifferent did not have much affection for their loved ones. But because of the influence of morality, law, and other factors, they showed a deep affection for their loved ones. Thus, the fear he felt when he was refined by Luo Fan and the panic he felt now was not out of his character as a treasure spirit. At this time, Feng Ling's expression of worry and panic was not because he cared about Ba Yuan, but because he had various rational thoughts. He understood that if something happened to Ba Yuan, his master might punish him. Therefore, he showed this kind of worry and panic. And the following change of events quickly made him feel how untimely his worry and panic was. This was because when he first felt this kind of emotion, the edge of the bone powder below, which was the bone powder that came into contact with Ba Yuan, began to undergo a subtle change. There seemed to be an indescribably powerful source of heat suddenly appearing in the bone powder. Then, the bone powder began to gradually melt and gradually collapse. The surrounding bone powder began to flow towards the melting and collapse, continuing the process of melting and collapsing. This kind of change was extremely unfamiliar to Fengling. But he knew that this kind of change was definitely caused by Bai Yuan, and since Bai Yuan could make this kind of change, it naturally meant that his safety should not be a problem. To be continued. Chapter 788. As the bone powder continued to melt, more and more bone powder from the surroundings flowed towards the place where the bone powder had melted and collapsed, trying to fill up the pit created by the bone powder. However, the bone powder that was trying to fill up the hole was like a clay ox entering the sea. Although it continued to fill up the hole, it didn't help the hole at all. Instead, the crater continued to expand and deepen. This change finally made Fengling feel completely at ease. He was a 6th-tier magic treasure, and the power he could display was comparable to that of a 7th-tier mortal. Under such circumstances, his perception was naturally extremely shocking. Although Bai Yuan was submerged in the bone powder that contained a huge amount of power, and his tiny aura was completely concealed by the aura of the bone powder, he was still able to capture a trace of Bai Yuan's aura. He understood that Bai Yuan's life was no longer in danger, and he finally felt completely at ease. As long as Bai Yuan's life was not in danger, it was unlikely that he would be blamed by Luo Fan for what happened to Bai Yuan. As such, it made no difference to him what happened to Bai Yuan. And the following changes not only confirmed his judgment, but also showed that his judgment was not bold enough. The hole in the bone powder became deeper and deeper, and finally, it reached an extreme point. An invisible flame suddenly pierced through the hole. Then Bai Yuan, who was wrapped in the invisible flame, slowly floated out of the hole with his eyes closed. Looking at his expression, there was not a trace of pain. Instead, there was a sense of enjoyment. He floated in the middle of the collapsed mountain, the flames around him spreading in all directions, wrapping more and more bones and powder in the surroundings in the flames. The bone powder, which contained a huge amount of power, was constantly ignited by the invisible flame and turned into nothingness. Every time a bit of bone powder was ignited, the invisible flame grew stronger and stronger. Every time a bit of bone powder was ignited, the formless flame seemed to have absorbed the power of the bone powder and grew a little stronger. In the few breaths that it took for Bai Yuan to float in the area covered by the invisible flames on Bai Yuan's body had already increased by at least 10%. From this, it could be seen just how much benefit his formless flame had received. It seems that he has profited from his misfortune. Fengling sighed with emotion as she watched from the side. However, he was not envious. Although Bai Yuan's heart flame was growing and becoming stronger at an unimaginable speed, it was still insignificant to him. He was a 6th-tier magic treasure. Just his cultivation realm alone was already not much different from a 6th-tier immortal. Moreover, he was a Dharma treasure, so he didn't have the shackles of a physical body. The power that he could contain and the power that he could unleash could exceed the limits of the 6th-stage immortal realm and reach the 7th-stage immortal realm. Compared to himself, how could the power of an 8-elemental 3rd-stage immortal realm be worthy of his attention? Thus, when he looked at Bai Yuan now, it was as if he was looking at an ant that had obtained a grain of rice that was as large as the ant itself. How could he possibly be envious? Bai Yuan naturally did not know what Fengling was thinking at this time. At this time, he had already fallen into a wonderful state where the heart flame was constantly rising. Every rise of the heart flame was directly reflected in his mind and body. His mind and intent were constantly rising along with the rise of the heart flame. The various truths that he had previously comprehended, the secrets of the various laws, and even the profound mysteries of the grand Tao gradually appeared in his mind and intent like a scroll. Gradually, they combined with his own ability and truly became the driving force for his cultivation realm to rise, causing his cultivation realm to slowly rise. The rise of cultivation realm was the rise of a cultivator's life. It was not just comprehending certain truths or comprehending certain mysteries. Some profound mysteries could be achieved in one go. Without the corresponding power, even if one understood the key to becoming a saint, even if one understood all the principles and mysteries of reaching the level of a saint, it was just a dream. At most, one could only unleash the power that was a few times stronger than one's own cultivation realm. The cultivation realm of one's body was still limited to the original realm. The mastery of the various truths and mysteries would inevitably be like looking at flowers in a fog, as if there were layers of barriers separating them, and it was impossible to truly see clearly. Thus, although Ba Yuan had previously comprehended many truths and raised his cultivation realm to the peak of the third stage, immortal realm, allowing him to completely break through the bottleneck to the peak of the third stage, immortal realm. As long as he continued to accumulate strength, he would be able to reach the peak of the third stage, immortal realm. However, as long as he did not accumulate strength, the various truths and mysteries that he had comprehended would not be his. Without the corresponding power, he would not be able to truly grasp those truths and mysteries. It might be difficult to understand this way, but it was easy to understand from another perspective. Although Ba Yuan had comprehended all kinds of principles and mysteries, if there was a force that could seal or even erase his memories of these principles and mysteries, then it would be as if he had never comprehended these principles and mysteries. Everything would return to its original state, and the difficulty of continuing to advance would not be any different from when he was at the beginning and would not decrease in the slightest. However, if he had the corresponding power, these truths and mysteries would truly become part of him and truly become an inseparable entity. Under such circumstances, if other living beings want to take away these truths and mysteries, then it would not be possible to erase or seal the memories. It would only be possible if there was a great divine ability that could lower his cultivation realm. And this difference meant that the mastery of the truths and mysteries was completely different. At this moment, Ba Yuan was obviously making up for this difference. He was constantly combining the truths and mysteries that he had comprehended before with himself, and truly becoming part of himself. His aura continued to grow stronger with this change, constantly advancing towards the peak of third step immortal realm. As his cultivation level rose, the nature of his heart fire also underwent a subtle change. His refining ability continued to strengthen, and his burning ability towards the surrounding bone powder also became stronger. The speed at which the surrounding bone powder poured down also became faster and faster. After all, this was only the edge of the bone dust, and the bone dust rushed here. When the bone powder rushed here, the strength was already relatively small. Thus, after refining for less than 15 minutes, the surrounding bone powder had already decreased to the point where it could no longer pour here, and had no power to replenish the collapsed bone powder. Thus, 15 minutes later, even though Ba Yuan's speed of burning the bone powder became faster and faster, and the refining speed of the bone powder became more and more shocking, the bone powder gradually stopped flowing here, and its source was gradually cut off. Realizing this change, Ba Yuan didn't stop moving. Instead, he turned around. And slowly moved towards the source of the bone powder. Along the way, he burned the bone powder even more furiously, channeling the power of the bone powder into his heart flame. After an unknown period of time, the bone powder that surged out of the heaven and earth level was finally completely refined by Ba Yuan. The power contained within was also completely absorbed by Ba Yuan's heart flame. With the help of this power, Ba Yuan's cultivation realm also rose to near the peak of third step immortal realm. Compared to before, there was a huge change, and it had increased by more than 10 times. However, he still had not reached the peak. After all, he still needed more bone powder to raise his cultivation realm to the peak. All of a sudden, he opened his eyes amidst the heart flame that was more than 10 times stronger than before. His eyes were filled with struggle and hesitation. In the heaven and earth level of the tower, the amount of bone powder was more than 10,000 times that of the outside world. If he entered, there would no longer be any obstacles in raising his cultivation realm. Reaching the peak of third step immortal realm would be a matter of time, and even breaking through from third step immortal realm to fourth step immortal realm was not impossible. However, Luo Fan's words were still ringing in his ears. If he entered the heaven and earth level, it would be equivalent to going against Luo Fan's orders. This could be a big or small matter. If Luo Fan did not care, naturally nothing would happen. If Luo Fan took advantage of this, it would be equivalent to killing him. No one could say anything even if he destroyed his own soul and scattered it. Under this kind of situation, even if his mind was drowned in the joy of raising his cultivation realm, Bai Yuan had to carefully weigh the pros and cons. At this moment, a voice rang in his ears, freeing him from the dilemma. There is no more killing intent here. You can all come in. This voice was leisurely and clear, like a beautiful Tao voice. It instantly caused Bai Yuan to feel an incomparable joy from the bottom of his heart. Under this joy, even the nature of the heart flame changed subtly. This voice came from his master, Luo Fan. Hearing this voice, Bai Yuan was overjoyed. After thanking his master for granting him his wish, he ignored Feng Ling and directly floated into the heaven and earth level. The heaven and earth level was originally filled with killing intent that had existed for hundreds of millions of years. Even the rules and laws had changed slightly. Even though the entire heaven and earth level was no longer filled with killing intent, there was still an extremely subtle pressure. The moment Bai Yuan stepped into it, he felt his body become heavy. He found that he needed to use several times more power to maintain his floating state. He could not help but be shocked. He hurriedly gathered his power, and the heart flame erupted. It crazily shrouded the endless bone powder below, burning the bone powder frantically. The power of the bone powder continuously condensed into the heart flame, causing the heart flame's power to rise crazily. His cultivation realm continued to advance towards the peak of the third step immortal realm. At this moment, Feng Ling unhurriedly floated into the heaven and earth level. As he floated in the air, he could only sigh at Bai Yuan's good luck. After spending so much time together, he already knew what Bai Yuan's identity was. He knew that Bai Yuan was merely Luo Fan's slave for 1,000,000 years. Even so, his master still had the time to consider for him. When he was even wavering on whether or not to obey his orders, he pulled him out of his wavering and directly changed his orders. What kind of benevolent master was this? At this moment, he had a lot more confidence in his fate. A master who was so benevolent to his own slave would definitely be even more benevolent to a magic treasure that was of great help to him. Thinking of this, a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, Luo Fan did not care about Bai Yuan and Feng Ling previously. When he opened his mouth to change his orders and let Bai Yuan enter the heaven and earth level, it was only because he sensed the situation outside the tower and found that this was a great opportunity for Bai Yuan. He also felt that Bai Yuan's increase in strength was beneficial to him, so he felt that there was no need to stop him from obtaining his opportunity. However, he did not always pay attention to them. At this moment, he stood in the tower with his palm open. There was an extremely mysterious light floating above his palm. This mysterious light was just an illusory light. However, after condensing into a fist-sized ball, it seemed to have substance, as if it was an incomparably solid, mysterious crystal. It floated above Luo Fan's palm, slowly rotating. It was a little bright, but it was not dazzling. It was like a black hole, attracting the eyes of everyone who saw it. At this moment, Luo Fan was looking at it. This mysterious light was formed when he directly smashed the immortal devouring beast's body. It contained all of the immortal devouring beast's qualities. It contained the immortal devouring beast's power, its murderous aura, its will, its soul, and even his entire body. In fact, when this mysterious light appeared, he originally planned to refine it into the few magic treasures he had obtained in the first building after entering this world of ruins. It would increase the power of those magic treasures and reverse the mistakes during their refining process. However, when this mysterious light touched his hand, he felt that this mysterious light contained a trace of strange existence. With Luo Fan's cultivation with his eyes, he might not be able to recognize what it was, what kind of qualities it had, and what kind of power it had. However, it was extremely easy to see if something was pure, if there was something in it that didn't belong to it, or if there was something in it that didn't belong to it. Therefore, even though it was his first time turning a beast into this mysterious light, he could tell with a glance if this mysterious light was pure or if there was something in it that didn't belong to the beast. Therefore, even though it was his first time turning a beast into such a mysterious light, he could tell with a glance if this mysterious light was pure or if there was something in it that didn't belong to the beast. In the deepest part of the mysterious light, there were countless strange threads that were intertwining and transforming according to an extremely complicated method, forming a strange pattern. This strange pattern was incomparably complicated and abstruse. It was also extremely small, so small that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. It was even smaller than a speck of dust by billions of times. Luo Fan observed it carefully for a long time and finally couldn't help but exclaim in joy. So that's how it is. This is a type of spiritual guidance. I didn't expect to be able to use this method to refine magic treasures. It is truly a wonderful idea. Spiritual guidance was an existence unique to magic treasures in the Great Heaven Primordial World. All of the magic treasures in the Great Heaven Primordial World did not have the treasure spirit of the magic treasures in the Great Desolate World. However, they possessed spiritual nature. This kind of spiritual nature was born from the magic treasure itself. It could even be said that it was the product of the magic treasure combining with the laws of the world. As for the spiritual guidance, it was naturally born from this kind of spiritual nature. It was a wondrous existence formed from the magic treasure itself. This kind of spiritual guidance had no other use than to fuse with some kind of power from the outside world. After countless years of accumulation, a certain kind of power was transmitted back to the spiritual nature. This strengthened the spiritual nature and allowed the magic treasure's power to continuously increase. Therefore, it could be said that the spiritual guidance was the chance of survival that the Great Heaven Primordial World left for all magic treasures. It was a natural channel for all magic treasures to transcend the shackles. Of course, this chance of survival didn't have much significance to most magic treasures because they had an owner. A single refinement from the owner was comparable to the spiritual guidance that had lasted for tens of thousands of years. Moreover, even if he ignored the issue of efficiency, it would still take billions or even billions of years for a magic treasure to truly be able to exist without the need for its owner to refine it and be able to be independent of its owner. How could a magic treasure exist for such a long time? Generally speaking, the power of the spirit guidance fusion belonged to some kind of vast and unchanging existence between heaven and earth. For example, the moon, the stars, the earth, the sky, and so on. But at this moment, the spiritual guidance that appeared in front of Luo Fan within the mysterious light formed by the immortal devouring beast was different. This spiritual guidance was actually fused with a type of living being. At this very moment, the spiritual guidance was constantly emitting a subtle attractive force. It was constantly attracting the mysterious power of the immortal devouring beast and transferring it through a mysterious channel to an unknown location. At the same time, the spiritual guidance seemed to be illusory, as if it was about to pass through space and time to move to another location. In this situation, it was clear that a certain magic treasure's spiritual guidance had fused with the immortal devouring beast at an unknown time. It was using the immortal devouring beast to gather the power needed for the spiritual guidance. At this moment, the immortal devouring beast had died and was about to use a certain method to leave. It could return to the magic treasure or move to another living being and start a new cycle. This method was fundamentally different from a normal spiritual guidance that was fused with an eternal object and slowly used to increase the magic treasure's power. The efficiency was at least 1,000 times higher. With the help of the mysterious function of the spiritual guide, Luo Fan was able to innovate and develop a whole new way of using the spiritual guide. For him, it was like a painter seeing a master's work of his dreams. How could he not feel happy? How could he not praise it? To be continued.